CD4. That organised, they made their way to their room, slipped out of their dresses and shoes, washed again, this time a more lengthy affair after Elsa had found another bowl to cart water from the well. Even with only cold water, Elsa scrubbed gleefully. They climbed into their beds. Daylight was fading fast, but it would have only been about 8 in the evening. As she settled under the covers, Elsa felt the weight of grief crawl through her. Thoughts of their pa and George crowded her head and her heart. She clamped it down, wanting to soothe it away, but it was a hard, tangible thing that gnawed at her, plumbed depths that she'd forgotten she knew, too deep for even tears to rise to the surface now. She just took a couple of swallows. Rosie sighed loudly. "Oh, I imagine this is what heaven feels like," she said, her voice muffled as she turned onto her side. "A lovely bed, and all to myself." Distracted, relieved, Elsa mulled over what Rosie could mean. Perhaps now was a good time to appease her curiosity, to slip into conversation with her older sister, who would be a font of knowledge and experience. "So, if being alone in bed feels like heaven, what's it like to share a bed?" At first she thought Rosie hadn't heard her. "I mean, I know what you mean." Rosie still faced away, I think. Still there was nothing, so Elsa pressed on and said, "To sleep by the side of a man." More silence, then. "The sleeping part is the easy part, if you can get to sleep over the snoring, and the farting loud enough to rival Pepin's." Elsa cracked a laugh. "Rosie!" Her sister turned onto her back. "I think what you're asking me is what our ma would have told you once you were old enough. But she didn't live long enough to do it. Is it really up to me now?" "I suppose it is. You're old enough to know, well over marrying age. Nearly an old maid, I should think." "Not true," Elsa retorted, knowing it was a tease, but felt the creep of a blush on her face all the same. "It's not that I don't know what happens." "Really? Have you—" "No!" Elsa was quick to say, "but I've had enough experience on the farm watching the animals. I got the general idea. It never looks a pleasant experience for the female." There was a silence again. Then Rosie said, "The mechanics are the same, so to speak, but the delivery is not always violent. I've heard it whispered that it can be pleasurable, but I can't imagine it. Sometimes it's not even noticeable." That relieved Elsa, but also confused her. "I didn't know what to think when I first married Frank. I do wish our ma had said more than, 'Close your eyes and it won't feel so bad.'" Elsa felt the blush burn. Rosie went on, her voice flat. "She didn't say anything more than that it was to be endured, and that it is a duty, and believe me, that's all it is. I wouldn't have done it if I didn't have to." Then she gave a short laugh. "And now I don't have to." Elsa chewed her lip. "Does it hurt?" A hesitation. "Sometimes." "Why do we have to do it?" "Don't be thick, Elsa. That's how babies come." "Clearly not always." Elsa shot back and then regretted it. "I mean, we are told to be so strict before we marry because we might become fallen women, yet once married it doesn't always follow that doing it means we get children. Ma had 5. There was the silence again. "And have you been strict, Elsa?" "Of course." Elsa didn't say that no one had approached her. Well, not seriously. Henry made her squirm a bit, made her want to press her knees together when he looked at her that way, but it didn't make her feel unpleasant. In fact, the opposite. But he was too young. Mr. Southey made her feel unpleasant, and her mouth twisted at his image. Shying away from that, and emboldened, Elsa asked, "So what exactly does happen, Rosie?" Rosie drew in a loud breath. "Oh, Lord, why me?" she muttered and exhaled just as loudly. "You're in your bed, the one you share with your husband, on your back. He climbs on top of you, pushes a sweaty hand under your chemise, and he feels about between your legs. I presume so he knows where to put his man thing." Elsa cringed. Man thing? Then he lifts his own nightshirt and his man thing springs against you. Hard sometimes, not always. Sometimes not for long either, before he gets to you. And then it won't work. Does that mean? If it's hard enough, he opens your legs and pushes it into you. Elsa's legs tightened. Then he thrusts a bit with his hips, makes a loud groaning noise, spills himself either inside you or on your leg, then falls off you. Spills himself? Then he goes to sleep, snoring and etc. What does he spill? I thought you said you watch the animals. Spills the stuff that makes the babies. Oh. Then you have to clean yourself up, otherwise you'd have to sleep in it. Rosie waited a beat. Are you suitably disgusted? That, sister, is duty, and we must endure it in order to have children. I can think of no other reason why we are ever talked into it, or worse, forced into doing it. It is not pleasant. Elsa's lip curled. After what you've just told me, I don't think I'll ever do it. Rosie gave a little laugh. When you know you can't get out of it, you'll do it. Perhaps I won't marry, Elsa said. And you? Never having had children. Does that mean you did your duty all for nothing? Rosie sniffed and cleared her throat. Most likely. But I had thought at one time to find other means to... She stopped abruptly. What? Nothing. She blew out a breath. Besides, I must have been getting too old because lately Frank has hardly seemed interested enough to bother me. Which is a good thing because clearly since I'm not able to have children, I don't miss all of his huffing and grunting on me. Oh, it was just awful. Thankfully, the last time was well over a year ago. She stopped again and sighed. And now that I've painted you that charming picture, if it's not enough to give you a sleepless night, I don't know what is. Rosie turned away on her side. Elsa propped on her elbow. You were going to say something about other means. Other means to do what? Oh, never mind that. Other means to do what? Elsa insisted. It's late, Rosie railed. It's not. Are you going to tell me what you were about to say? Her eyes had adjusted to the dim light in the room. Rosie began to turn back, and then stopped. No, I'm not. Another time, perhaps. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to sleep and have another glorious night without wondering if someone is going to fumble in my breeches. Good night, Elsa, she said, her tone clipped as she settled on her side, still facing away. Elsa lay down again. She couldn't imagine what would make her want to endure what Rosie had just described. She thought of those men in the bar and shook herself away from that. Thought of Henry and the look he'd given her at times, and things tingled deep between her thighs. Then she thought of Rosie doing her duty with Frank, but the picture was so awful, so very intrusive and distasteful of her to even be thinking of it, that the tingles immediately dissipated, and she put it out of her head. No wonder some women didn't marry. No wonder there were nuns. Not that she felt called to God at all, but they could certainly escape such male desires because nuns were forbidden to lie with men. But Elsa didn't like the idea of becoming a nun either. But what other means? She sighed and yawned widely. Rosie's even breathing signalled that her sister was asleep, so Elsa turned on her side. Lots of young women she knew hankered to be married. It couldn't only be the way Rosie described. Surely there was a decent man, someone quite different to Frank. A kind man. After a restless hour wondering if life really could be better than this, she spent a dreamless night. In the morning, Elsa set off at the reins. Pepin had been harnessed by the lad who'd stabled him, and Rosie climbed on board after her. Rosie leaned over. "How do we know which way to go?" she asked, close to Elsa's ear. They hadn't asked for directions to be sure that if anyone did follow, no one would be able to say where they'd headed. "Casterton is to the southeast, so if we take the main road this way, I'm sure it'll be right. There's bound to be a sign, and then we'll veer off. I remember from Mr. Conroy that there were a few tracks that teams used to cut across to the Mount Gambier Road when they needed to." The sun's early rays had swathed a golden glow over the road. Elsa was squinting into it, but Pepin, refreshed, trotted confidently. "It makes my nerves twitter, Elsa." Elsa took a deep breath. "Mine too," she said, and glanced at her sister. "Besides, it's not a great distance, and if we feel too nervous, we can always return the same way." Settling herself, Rosie shook her head. "There's that adventurous spirit again, dear girl. Thought you'd have grown out of it by now." Elsa shrugged and clicked the reins again. "Always knew there was another world outside my own. But by the time I grew up, our mother was gone, and our older brothers were gone. Suddenly there was the farm to look after, and then Pa. George was still dreaming all day long about how he'd go adventuring, and he would go off here and there, and leave me to it." She looked at Rosie with a rueful smile. "Then there was only me. And now you too." She let Rosie squeeze her hand, and then she shook away morose thoughts. "So, I'm taking up the adventure. If Frank is to make the farm work, there'll be nothing in robe for me." Rosie looked at her sharply. "What makes you think Frank will make the farm work? He might sell it." Elsa made a face. "I don't know what he'll do, but he is the only man in the family now." "Did Pa say something to you about it?" Rosie burst. "Don't be upset. Pa wanted me to marry. He didn't want me administering. And so when he mentioned Frank on that last day, I just assumed he meant that Frank would take over. And what else did he say about Frank?" Elsa thought hard. Her mind had been woolly on that day. So much had happened. "We were talking about how badly you'd miss George." She frowned, remembering. "Then he said that I was to bring you home, so he could talk to you first. He said first, and that Frank was the only man in the family." There was something else in the conversation with her father that Elsa couldn't quite put her finger on. "I got the feeling he wanted to tell you something, or have you do something, but he didn't say." Rosie stared off into the distance, shading her eyes once or twice, then ducked her chin to gaze at her hands. She finally said, "Let's find one of those tracks and get off this road. I thought we'd give it 2 or 3 hours and then try to turn off." Elsa looked at her sister. "Had Pa spoken to you earlier about something to do with the farm?" Rosie looked at her and nodded. "I'd forgotten. Nothing ever seemed likely. George was headstrong, but I always thought he was invincible too. Pa had said a long time ago, after Ned died, that if something happened to George, he would name me administrator for his affairs." Elsa's mouth dropped open, then closed again as flies tickled her face. "Did he write anything down?" "It will be in his will." "I have that." Rosie glared at her. "I know, but it won't be worth a thing if it is opened," she rebuked sharply. "It's sealed," Elsa cried. "I know a lawyer has to see it." Rosie sat up straight. "I don't know if he wrote anything down. Truly, I didn't take a lot of notice because at the time, it hardly mattered. Even when George went off on his adventures, I never gave it a thought. Why would I? Being married to Frank, I would have to hand it all to him anyhow, even if my name was on a will." "No, you wouldn't. The law changed years ago, you know that." "And I know Frank," Rosie said, a wry twist on her lips. Ahead, a ragged, scrawny clutch of 4 children appeared at the side of the road. 3 boys and a girl. Dead rabbits were slung over their backs and shoulders, certainly a good meal or two there, and no doubt some coin would be exchanged for the pelts. The dirt-smudged faces stared up solemnly in the early light, and one of the taller lads raised a hand, holding up a furry body. "Tucker for a few pennies, missus." Rosie shook her head. Elsa waved back, well remembering those days of her own past. "Thank you. No." She clicked the reins again, and as they drove by, he called, "Hooray, miss!" Shifting again, the memories rankling, Elsa said, "If you thought you were being adventurous by leaving, now we have to make sure we find that tin of George's to pay for a lawyer. That'll be our real challenge. There might be more to our future in that tin than we think, if indeed it's still to be found." "All those sovereigns," Rosie said. "What a mess." Elsa squared her shoulders. "None of that. We are strong women, and we will find our way out of this." She raised her chin higher. "We are the Goody sisters. Better, we are intrepid Mrs. Conroy and her clever daughter Miss Myrtle." Looking over at Rosie, she saw a glimmer of a smile. 12. Nebo shot to his feet as Glenn Barton galloped in. "What is it?" Glenn threw himself off his horse. "That Billy Watson, the great fat red-headed git who's got it in for you. Seems he's told tales after all. We got to get out of here quick. He's put the finger on you for bashing him and says we're cattle and sheep duffing." He ran across to Tilly when she appeared out of their tent. "I'm packing up," he called back. "Moving further in. We can all go there." Christ. Nebo threw his pannikin to the ground. Well, he knew it wouldn't have lasted long, especially after he'd had a go at Watson. But going further in, and by that Glenn meant into swampy country between Mount Gambier Road and the Penola Road, they'd be that much further away from the ambush site they'd chosen to bail up the coach. But we'd also be that much further out of sight. Retrieving the pannikin, he looked up. Clouds had gathered around the sun, and more on the western horizon. Might mean rain tonight. Shit. He wished he'd been able to buy that tent he needed. He laughed to himself. He needed a house to live in, not a tent. One more job. Then he'd go on the straight and narrow, patch things up with Jude. Ezzy was another matter. Maybe work Jude's farm for him while he went off roaming the countryside. Wally was flicking mud from his hands as he pushed hair off his face. It smeared on his cheek. "Nebo, we're moving as well." Nebo watched Sal straighten tiredly, a hand on her back, and her belly protruding as she listened. "I don't know how long we got till the troopers ride in," he said. "You're right. Best to pack up now, and quick." Wally hesitated, glanced at Sal, who nodded. "I gotta go somewhere safe. Sal hasn't gone long to go. She reckons a month. I can't be dragging her all over the place." Nebo knew one thing for sure. He didn't want a baby birthing right when he needed all the boys for his job. Course not. Course not. We need to find a place. Bit of higher ground somewhere. "Yeah, me and Fred found a spot," Wally said. "Needs work. Some drains dug, but it's a good site. Good water in a couple of places nearby. We'd be hid from the other road, and it's not far in. Good access. Closer to the Penola Road. It cuts in between real neat, right in a patch between the two roads. We can still get to the coach easy enough." Nebo stared. So the boys had already scouted for another place. What did that mean? Wally didn't look away. Didn't look defiant either, just matter of fact. No use getting all nervous about it. Wally had done the right thing, was looking after Sal and the new little one to come. "Let's go then," he said. "Yeah," Wally said. "But Nebo." Fred began to pack away a few remaining tools into a large bag. Alice was stuffing bedding into a couple of sacks. Glenn and Tilly worked on dismantling their humpy. They'd all been way ahead of him on this. "What?" Nebo said, short, annoyed. After this last one? This last job? I'm heading maybe to Portland. Heard there's a bit of work there. And Sal? Nebo didn't know what else to say. We'll be all right. Wally turned and walked away. Sal turned with him, picked up the last of her still damp bricks, and hurled them into the scrub. Fred had begun strapping his bag to his horse. It's a good camp, Nebo, where we're going now. But like Wally, I'm off after this. Me and Alice can make a living on good farming land further south. Or maybe if there's a timber mill somewhere, we can set up business. Nebo bowed his head and stood, hands on hips. They'd talked about it. All of them? He looked up at Glenn and Tilly. Glenn shrugged at him. I'm not bothering about a place here anymore. I've got family in New South Wales, on land south of Sydney. Nobody knows Tilly there. This last job will maybe buy me a cart and we can head off. Nebo looked around. Wally had nearly packed everything they owned. Sal was shrugging on a bag. She'd walk miles like that. Even heavy as she was with child, she had to. They couldn't get her on Wally's horse, and no one had a cart. Fred was tying Alice's tools onto a spread of oiled canvas. Then he rolled it up and tied it to his horse. Alice threw him her bag and he strapped it on. Glenn and Tilly were sorting seed into little paper packets. Glenn folded them into squares and folded again before tying them off with twine. He shoved them into his saddlebag and said, We reckon you'll find your way, Nebo. Find what it is you want. We got to get along as best we can too. So, one last job. One last job. Nebo couldn't even get mad. They were right. One last job. 13. Zeke stood back from the man who said he was Curtis Goody. He'd brought him from Jude's place to the boy's gravesite. The day started out cooler, but now late in the afternoon, heat had built under a thick layer of cloud, and the wind had dropped to almost nothing. Storms ahead, maybe. Hopefully rain. The man dragged in a deep, pained breath as he knelt to place a hand on the hot earth of the mound over the boy's body. Sorrow welled in Zeke's chest. He too remembered the pain of losing a loved one. Jude had stayed behind at his place. Before Zeke left to walk back with Mr. Goody, his brother had called him aside. They'd left the man studying the area inside Jude's unfinished house when Nebo said he'd found the injured boy. Tell him nothing, Zeke, Jude had whispered, hurried and low. He hasn't told you anything about the boy. And who told him where to come? Yeah, I'm suspicious. Tell him nothing. Now, even though he was in the shade of the huge gum tree, sweat trickled down Zeke's back. The older man got to his feet. Funny. He'd forgotten to take his hat off as he'd said a prayer. Or that's what Zeke presumed he'd done. He'd heard him murmuring while he was on his knee. Mind if I camp here the night? Goody asked, his frown dark over an unsmiling face. Don't mind. It might be weather coming in. Zeke pointed to the sky. Been in worse. Goody turned back and stared at the grave again. Boy didn't leave any possessions behind. Had none when he came to me. Zeke answered. He kept his head down, as if in respect. The man grunted. Tell me how he came to you. My brother found him. Jude had been tight-lipped when the man had begun asking his questions, and Zeke had followed suit. He'd never been abrupt like his older brother, but he took Jude's lead this time and didn't offer too much. As if by a silent agreement, neither Zeke nor Jude brought their middle brother into it. He couldn't look after him there. You've seen how he lives. And the boy died where? The boy, not my son. At my house. The man glared, then grunted again, changed his stance a little. Oh, thank you. Maybe a man in pain, Zeke thought. You're welcome to a meal here with us. I've got hungry kids coming back from school. We could stretch a rabbit stew to one more mouth." The glare came again, and then a shake of his head. "Grateful, but no. How'd you get here? Cart? On a horse? Walking?" "On a horse. He couldn't walk." It was Nebo's horse, but Zeke wouldn't offer that. "A horse? Could he have gone somewhere else before your brother found him?" "Shoot's right. This is strange." "Doubt it. Reckon whoever shot him left him for dead. Or thought he was already dead. I sent you a letter. First he died." The glare darkened. "A letter? Sent it to your farm. You didn't get it." A short shake of the man's head again. "I followed soon after the boy left home. Wanted to track him down, bring him back before he got into too much trouble. Missed the letter. Well, his sisters would have it now," Zeke said. "Sad for them. No pa there to help them with the news." The man thought a moment. "Aye, the women folk," he said, as if just remembering he had daughters. "I should get back to them." The man said and stared off into the distance. Then he looked at Zeke. "He, talk a bit, did he, before he died?" "Not really talk. Whispers about this and that. About his mother. That he had 2 sisters. How he was the last boy. His brother's gone too." Young George had called out more than once about a sister on the farm. Ellie? Alice? He hadn't been too coherent by then. The man nodded. "I'll stay up here a while if you don't mind. Won't be disturbing you." Zeke hesitated but said, "Stay as long as you like." The man nodded, looked away again as if in thought, but he said nothing more. Zeke's kids would be just about at the mail tree now. He needed to see them, hug them tight. He strode off, not sure if the man had watched him or not. Gif pushed his plate away. "When we going to see Uncle Jude?" His 3 kids stared at him. Jonty had his fork laden with potato and gravy, halfway up to his mouth. Gracie set her knife and fork on her plate. Zeke took another couple of mouthfuls, chewed and swallowed. Nearly time for another batch of stew the way these kids were eating. They'd have to have an extra loaf of bread a day, too. "Tomorrow's not a school day, so how about we do our chores early and get over there?" Satisfied with that, it seemed, Jonty angled his fork into his mouth and chewed. "Good," Gif said. He stood up and took his plate to the pot on the stove. Scraping out his last ladleful, he turned and looked at Zeke, offering the spoon. "Pa?" Zeke shook his head. He could easily have eaten another plateful, but Gif needed it more than he did. Jonty was a slow eater, but he'd soon finish his. Gracie never asked for seconds. Gif helped himself to the remaining mashed spud and the last drop of gravy. Back at the table, he said, "I reckon he could use some help fixing up the roof again." Zeke agreed. "You'd be right. Don't know that he'll be expecting us, though." "He will." Gif concentrated on the last mouthfuls. "He always knows we'll come as soon as he's home." He dragged the last of his bread through the cold streaks of gravy on his plate. "Thank God for my kids." If there was going to be a way back to his brother Jude, it would be through these kids. They'd never given up on him. As gruff as he'd appeared, as often as he'd pushed them away. They just let him be Jude. Where had they got that from? "Can I leave the table, Pa?" Gif asked, and without waiting for the nod, he stood and the others followed, Jonty's cutlery clanging. "We need to take some food for tomorrow." Having stood too, Zeke and the other children took their utensils to the washing-up bowl that sat on a bench under the window. Gif left Gracie at the bowl. It was her turn, and he took to rummaging in the only vermin-proof cupboard they had. He pulled out a sack with a drawstring. Gracie can go to the orchard. I'll go check the traps after I feed the dogs. Zeke peered outside. There was still enough light for Gift to find his way around. Plenty of rabbits to trap, plenty of stew to cook. And the pelts were fetching good prices. Trappers are getting up to £8 a week if they're smart, Giff had told his father. Zeke knew it to be true, knew how much that sort of money would mean to his family. He just wanted his eldest son to be a boy for a while longer. He was 9 and not have to work for his living yet. He wasn't winning. Zeke watched Giff hand the sack to Gracie, who'd finished the washing up. She headed out behind her brother to pick the last of the apples before the birds and the insects got to the lot. Jude had said years ago that he'd build a cold store. Zeke might have to remind him of that. He called after Giff. "And not out too late. Jude will want a fair day's work out of you, not a sleepyhead." Giff lifted a hand in acknowledgement. Coming up 10. The boy was young, too young. But other families had their children working on the farms, hoping to survive without paying an adult wages. Times were tough, so education had to play second fiddle to family survival for many. At least he had his kids close by, not like some who'd been sent away, or some whose fathers had abandoned them. Never. That would never happen. His kids were everything to him. The boy could trap all the rabbits he liked as long as he stayed close to home. He watched, his chest expanding. The dogs, tied up, barked madly as Giff took his determined strides across the paddocks around the base of the hill. 14. Elsa's backside, no longer numb, hurt with every bounce of the cart. Her bones, her teeth, rattled as Pepin doggedly followed orders and took them off the main road. It had only appeared to be a slight grading through an opening of low scrub, but was proving hard work. "Goodness gracious!" Rosie yelled, one hand hanging onto the vehicle, the other onto her hat. "It's all right," Elsa yelled back. "Nearly done." "We should have got off and walked him into the scrub." "Done now," Elsa replied, and sure enough, Pepin's stride was evening out. "Check the water barrel." Rosie craned her neck to see into the back of the cart. "Looks like the lid's held together." She turned back again. "And I'm glad the cart held together. Are you sure that was the right thing to do?" "No, but the wheels seem all right, so we just have to be careful from now on." She pointed ahead. "Do you see those faint wheel tracks there? I think this will be one of the places where others have cut through to the Mount Gambier Road." "Wish I was as sure as you are," Rosie grumbled. "How long will it take before we get to the other road?" Elsa didn't know. She couldn't rightly remember if she'd ever known, but thinking back to Mr. Conroy's maps and his tales of bullocky adventures, she didn't think there was much in it. "I'd say a day's drive at most." More grumbling from Rosie as she hung on. "Looks like there might be rain coming." Elsa believed so too. Rain would make things less than pleasant, if the trip so far could be called pleasant, and not just for their getting wet. She knew this country held water, and drainage was poor. If there was a lot of rain, they risked getting bogged, risked Pepin, so they'd have to be vigilant. She looked skywards briefly. Great rolling clouds breezed overhead. The temperature was still a little too warm, but the threat of rain was there. She would have to carefully wrap their father's will to try and waterproof it, and the letter from Mr. Jones. Any moisture could ruin the ink, even her own perspiration. As soon as she could, she would check the letter she'd tucked in her bodice. Better still, she'd remove it to the satchel. "Pass me the satchel, Rosie." While Rosie took the reins after grabbing up the canvas bag, Elsa wrapped the letter from Mr. Jones into her smalls. Then she took her father's will from the toolbox and did the same with it. That done and the satchel once again secured over the back, she said, "We'll push on. Try to find a decent place before nightfall. Hope we meet the other road by then. Otherwise, I'd rather go back and stay on the Panola Road." Elsa heard the catch in Rosie's voice. We have water on board, we have a gun, and we're not far from either road. If we stay with these old tracks, we should be all right. And if we haven't found the other road by first thing tomorrow, we'll retrace our steps. Don't be frightened. Nothing will go wrong." "I'm not frightened." Elsa knew that was a fib. She glanced at her sister. Sure enough, Rosie looked worried. Her face drawn, and her mouth was set in a line. But Elsa was sure this track was one that would lead them to the Mount Gambier road. "Tell you what," she said, "if it gets too hard on Pepin, we'll get off and walk him, all right?" Elsa thought Rosie nodded, but with the cart bobbing on the rough track, it was hard to tell. Funny, she thought Rosie had more gumption in her. They were on the road to finding poor George's resting place, and hopefully their mother's locket and the tin of gold sovereigns. Rosie was escaping from her loveless marriage to Frank, and that also meant that Elsa would not have to deal with that awful Pete Southey anymore. And Elsa was on the way to find Mr. Jones, the kind letter writer. Nothing would go wrong. 15. Lily was finished tidying her cookhouse after baking up a storm of meat pies and fruit pies. Well, not that many. She'd really had to rein herself in, but 6 mutton and potato pies in just the right amount of gravy, and 6 apricot and apple pies, all in her famous pastry. That is, famous in her own kitchen, and baked to perfection, stood cooling on a timber bench under an open window. Just the thing to tempt a hard-working man. Goodness, I hadn't realised how much I'd been looking forward to Judah Jones returning. She stood for a moment and examined that thought as she dusted the flour from her apron. Rubbish, Lily. Stan had been gone a long while now, and lately thoughts of Jude had often crept into her daily grind when she least expected them. She knew what that meant. She was ready for another man in her life, and on the face of it, Jude suited her well. He'd always taken her eye, even though she'd been a good and faithful wife, and she knew him to have been a kind and honourable man. Over the last months he'd been away this time. She'd taken it upon herself to hitch up her horse and cart and drive to Jude's place, taking flowers from her garden. The first time it was to lay them on the graves of Judah's wife and daughters, which she had done, and found that the graves hadn't been looked after as lovingly as she'd expected. Well, he had been away travelling somewhere, and clearly his 2 brothers hadn't thought to do it. She remembered Anne, Jude's wife, and his daughters Clementine and Bess very well. They had been a much-loved family, and although theirs weren't the only deaths to diphtheria in the district, it had hit the town particularly hard. So Lily had set about weeding and tending to the graves. She'd taken some cuttings from her place and planted some shrubs of wattle around the site. When grown a little, they'd given a homey feel, somewhere to come and reflect in the peace that this place offered. It made her feel better to do it in any case. She would love that someone might tend her final resting place when the time came. Oh, she was sure her children would visit her grave when they got tired of their busy lives in the city. Oliver and Edward and Loretta, all in Melbourne. The boys were studying engineering at Melbourne University, thanks to an inheritance for their education from Stan's late uncle, and Loretta had a position as governess for some well-to-do folk in South Yarra. No one had married yet, but she was hopeful Loretta would accept her beau, young Bertie Drake, a carpenter. Oh, wait, was his name Drake or Dark? She must check her daughter's letter. She'd received the latest one several weeks ago. Where was it? Nary one from the boys since just before Christmas, though, over 3 months back. And that reminded her she'd already started a reply letter to her daughter. She should finish it off and get it into the post. Loretta would be interested to learn that Mr. Judah Jones was back in the district. She might very well have changed her tune about her mother marrying again, especially as she herself hoped to marry. Perhaps her daughter now understood the need for companionship, Although she hadn't been happily effusive when Lily had mentioned Judah in earlier letters, it would be lovely to talk to all of them in person. But visits from her children were rare. Lily had indeed spent too much time on her own. If her children didn't need her, she had to get on with life here, in Casterton. She didn't enjoy Melbourne. Too busy, too impersonal, and the smell. The boys had assured her that once they graduated, they would be working on the new sewerage system due to begin operating at Werribee. She was happy enough in the Western Districts, so wanted to rebuild a life here. And Jude Jones was in her sights. The trouble was, her children hadn't felt she should rebuild her life with another man. Loretta was her youngest and had been quite adamant in the past that her mother remain a widow. In fact, she'd been particularly irritable about it, and Oliver, the eldest, had become very prickly about the subject too. Edward, her middle child, had simply refused to discuss it. Of course, it was clear all three would have conferred. There was almost no point once again trying to explain that she would not be replacing their father with a new man in her life, but rather wanted to find a companion. No point. It only made her unhappy to think her children wished for her to continue to be alone. Even though Lily hadn't had a mind to heed them, it did unsettle her. A blowfly buzzed over her pies. She swished at it and found a tablecloth to cover her baked goods. Would it be the right thing to pack a few pies, cut a bunch of flowers, and just, arrive at Jude's place fully intent on going to the gravesite? She hesitated, sighed. She knew she'd do no such thing. Having strong feelings for a man, and one who was mostly absent in mind and body, was one thing, but to go chasing him was entirely another. Well, what to do? She'd done it again. She'd baked, and now had so much food she might as well give it away as let it spoil. You stupid woman. You should be well over these girlish thoughts. Perhaps Loretta and the boys are right. I'm being foolish. Everyone knew Judah Jones was made of granite these days. He barely had a glance for anyone, much less his neighbour's widow. What would he want with a middle-aged woman who'd been left on her dead husband's patch of dirt with nary a blade of grass on it? But how long would she hope to hold out on that patch of dirt? The little stipend Stan had left was only just enough to keep her going. She had her chickens and sold their eggs. She supplied baked goods to the store when she pestered them to take her excess. She hadn't had a new dress in a couple of years. She was frugal. She was careful with her watering and her vegetable patch, her fruit trees. And she felt like a lonely old lady, something Loretta could not possibly understand. Not yet, anyway. Old lady. She rushed out of the kitchen and into the house, down the short hallway to her bedroom, and checked her reflection in the small mirror atop her dresser. She pulled a face. Yes, there were fine lines. Yes, there were grey hairs, barely discernible, weaving their way through her fair hair. Yes, she would pluck out that stray chin hair right now, but all in all, she was presentable. She looked well, contained, dignified, and still with an imp in her eye when she felt like it. Her shoulders slumped. What is wrong with me? Nothing, she decided a moment later and straightened up. Nothing is wrong with me. I will cut my flowers, take one pie for myself to eat, perhaps two, just in case, go to Mrs. Jones's grave and the graves of her dear daughters, and do what I've always done. God knows no one else does. With that decided, she brushed the flour from her apron again and went back out to the kitchen. She collected her secateurs, sent over from her cousins in England, being only the finest of ladies' gardening tools, to cut the hardy, prickly and blooming Anise Segala roses. Such colour, so lucky to have the mauve crimson variety, rich and vibrant, and such romance in their name. Not the woman they were named for, unfortunately. This strange lady was all about sticking up for her rights as a woman, even way back in the late 40s. Then she seemed to have turned her back on the very same thing. Hard to keep up with, Lily, so don't try. But the blooms would make a memorable bouquet for the dear departed mother and daughters. Now there's a thought. The Anne is hardy enough to plant nearby. She would try and propagate some cuttings and use them for a garden around the graves. One should be joyful of the lives of loved ones who'd gone, not only lament their passing. Under a clear sky, Lily pulled the last stubborn weed from around Miss Clementine's resting place and sat back on her heels. She'd worked steadily for over an hour, relieving the hard earth of the stalwart and healthy but useless tufts. Goodness, it's warm today. Everyone says that it's too warm for autumn, but there you are. She watered the little cuttings she'd planted before the summer, pleased that most had survived and that they looked as sturdy as expected. Yes, the Anne would do well here. If only there'd been a nice big gum tree for shade. There wasn't one nearby, anyway. The undulating hills and plains were naturally grassy, with only a few patches here and there of tall, wooded areas. Looking over her shoulder, she could see all the way to Ezekiel Jones's property. The brothers had a good number of acres each, but some family issue had got between them and they'd decided to keep things separate. Some people believed that bigger holdings would better survive, and their separate blocks were not that big. She swung her gaze around to where she knew Judah Jones lived, just beyond the low rise, not very far at all, and wondered if he was at home. Wondered if she should chance a visit, despite good sense. Sighing at the futility of denying herself, she pushed herself off the dirt, gathered up her gardening tools, the secateurs, the little digging spades, a pitchfork and the shovel. She wrapped the smaller items in their burlap bag and tossed them into the cart, then grabbed up the rake, a heavy piece that Stan had made for himself, and slid it into the back. Flexing her back, she twisted left to right, stretched. She patted her horse, Cricket, on the rump, and climbed onto the cart. As Cricket turned his head for home, something caught her eye, rounding that low rise. It was a surprise to see a lone man she didn't recognize, on a horse approaching at a walk, not 50 yards from her. Had he been to see Jude? Why was he coming up this way? No reason to visit the gravesite unless he was a relative, perhaps, and paying his respects. He lifted a hand in a greeting, and a shiver skittered down Lily's back. All very well that she was trespassing, but she had very good reason. Just who is this man? No one she knew. She decided she wasn't going to stop to find out. She didn't have a good feeling. That shiver had come from nowhere, and she always trusted that. She gee-upped her horse and drove towards him, having to do so in order to turn the cart left onto the track that would take her home. For a wild moment, she thought he'd directed his horse across her path, but he pulled back. Her heart raced. She barely nodded as he called, "Good day," and flashed her a big smile. Definitely do not like the look of him. A man who looked as shabby as he did, and yet had gold in his teeth, could not be trusted. She kept going, her heart in her throat, until she could sneak a look behind to make sure he hadn't followed her. What on earth she thought she'd do if he did follow was beyond her. She couldn't even reach the gardening tools to throw at him. Oh, Lily Hartman, how silly. For goodness sake. The man hasn't done anything, and you have him already a criminal intent on harm. Cricket answered the flick of the reins for more speed, and when Lily was certain she wasn't being followed, and was equally certain she couldn't be seen by the man, she steered her horse to the right and onto the barely used backtrack to Jude Jones's house. She really began to feel silly at the same time she felt gladdened and relieved to see Jude's makeshift hut appear just around the hill. Smoke from his fire rose idly out of the chimney, and nothing at all looked amiss. What she expected to see, she wasn't sure. Goodness me. Any story she would give the reticent Judah Jones would sound as if she'd made it up. That her reasons for suddenly appearing uninvited would be transparent. Yes, Judah, I had to come because I saw a man on the track, and he smiled at me, and his teeth were glinting gold. Well, she couldn't very well turn the cart about now. She'd be seen by Jude for sure. She pressed on to his house, would just tell the plain truth of it, and hope she wasn't roundly told to get along and stop making a fuss over nothing. What a fool you can be at times, Lily Hartman. 16. Pulling on the cart's handbrake, Lily got to the ground and slung Cricket's reins over Jude's hitching rail. She stretched, then leaned in the back and lifted out her basket of goodies. She stood a moment longer, practicing once more her explanation for why she was just barging in on him without an invitation. "Well, hello, Mr. Jones. Judah, I thought perhaps you could do with—" No. "Hello, Judah. So glad you're home. I wonder if you'd like some pies. No. Good afternoon, Mr. Jones. I was just passing by after someone told me that— Oh, Lily, for goodness sake, just go up and knock on the door. He must be in. It's wide open." "Mr. Jones," she called as she approached the door. "It's Lily Hartman, your neighbour." No answer. Unsure of her next move, her steps faltered. She called again, her hand on her hat as if holding it against a breeze. There was no breeze. It was just something to do as she stood awkwardly in front of his hut. "Mr. Jones, are you there? It's just that I was at your family's gravesite and I saw a man." A noise. She listened. A voice. A groan, more like it. "Oh, Lord!" She swept forward to the doorway and saw him, blood everywhere, trying to get himself up. "Oh, my Lord!" she cried. "Judah!" Rushing inside, her basket flung away, she dropped to her knees, her hands spread, trying to see where the blood was coming from. Her hem was soaking it up. He recognized her, reached for her to help him sit. "Lily, you're a sight for me eyes." "Judah," she whispered urgently, her arm around his shoulders. "Can you crawl? Can you turn over? We must get this blood stopped. I must find where you're bleeding."
"Leave me, love. Get Zeke."
"Let me strap it. Wherever it is, I can—"
"Get Zeke."
He collapsed over her, and then she saw it. A big bladed knife had partially dislodged from his side, and blood flowed freely out of the wound. She knew not to pull it out. It could cause a rush of blood, worse than what was pouring out already. She had to stop it. But his weight was on her. She tried to move, slipped again. She pushed him as gently as she could until he rolled off her lap, his face down on the floor. She turned his head. As long as he still lived, he'd at least be able to breathe. Bedsheet. There wasn't one. Towel? Nothing. Curtain. She scrambled to her feet, away from the creeping pool of blood, and ripped it down from over his makeshift window. A faded gingham check. She shook out the dust. Poor Anne, his dear wife, had probably toiled over the embroidery on it. She bunched it, packed it into his side. The knife dislodged completely, and she cried aloud while jamming the fabric with as much pressure as she dared. With her free hand, she groped under him, undoing the knot of his soft leather belt. She tugged it off him and rolled it over the bandage, fumbling to get it back under his body to tie it off tight. Get Zeke. She couldn't do any more for Judah here. Get Zeke. There was nothing else to pack the wound. His face was grey, his eyes closed. She lurched to her feet, careful not to slip in the pool of his blood that seemed to follow up her dress, then drip from her hem. Dear God. Ezekiel's place was 5 miles by road, an hour. If she crossed country, maybe a half-hour drive. Rough, though, hard with horse and cart. But the time she'd waste unharnessing Cricket and riding bareback. Run, that would be quicker. What was she thinking? She'd have a heart attack. Unharness the horse and ride. Ride for Ezekiel's. She bent and swiped hair from his face. Judah, I'm going to get Ezekiel. You be alive when I get back. You hear me? Leave me, love. he'd said. She flew out the door, flew to the horse and cart. She secured the reins more tightly on the rails to hold a now skittish Cricket. Wrangling with the overgirth, she loosened it and slipped the poles out of the brace and moved the worried horse out of the trappings. Cricket would be nervous, able to smell Jude's blood on her clothes, able to feel her fear. She patted him, hoped to soothe him. She talked to him, walked him to Jude's house fence rails and climbed up, one hand still gripping the reins. She bunched both hands in his mane and hauled himself over his back. Oh, my Lord, I haven't done this since I was a girl. When she squeezed her knees, pulling her bloodied skirt out of the way, and dug her heels into Cricket's sides, he leapt into a gallop, and across the yellow grassy fields they raced. 17. Elsa sniffed and dabbed at her nose with the back of her wrist. A light mist was falling, and when she looked up, she could only see a faint patch of blue as the clouds rolled along. Rosie clambered down from the driver's seat, handing the reins over to her sister. "Where in God's name are we?" They'd pulled up at the crest of a short incline, and in front of them was a track, wider than normal. "I think we've just shot out onto the Mount Gambier Road." Elsa looked left and right, and as far as she could see in either direction, the road appeared to be well used. Pepin had marched resolutely towards a clearing from the rough track they'd been on all day and tugged them up onto a narrow but well-used road. Oh, good. So, which way? Rosie was brushing herself down. Elsa wondered about how safe Rosie'd be if she was on her own. She had no sense of direction at all. "Left. We can go on a little further and then get off the road again for the night." Her sister groaned. "Another night. How much further to Casterton?" "I've no way of knowing that. I'm certainly not going to attempt driving in the dark." Elsa slid across the seat. "Can't be far. Come on, get back up. We need to go and find a good place. Hurry up." Disgruntled, Rosie snorted as she climbed into the passenger seat. "Bossy. Perhaps you should be Mrs. Conroy and I'll be Miss Myrtle." Elsa flicked her a wry glance. It'd never work. She felt Rosie's elbow dig her in the ribs, and she laughed. "Gee up, Pepin," she said, and they lurched forward at a trot. The mist was clearing, the day bright in the afternoon sun. Elsa settled in. This road was a far more comfortable drive, and their journey, at least so far as Casterton, was nearly at an end. Elsa's stomach rumbled as she slid between the thin mattress on the ground and a light cotton cover. A good drink of water hadn't held the rumbles off for long, and the fruit and cheese from the pub in Penola that they'd shared had only taken off the edge of her hunger. Now that darkness had descended again, Rosie was sighing deeply, almost every second breath, but at last seemed to finally relax beside her. Then she startled Elsa. "I'll say this much, and only this much," Rosie began. "I've thought long and hard, since the other night, about telling you." Her voice was low and firm. Elsa waited, the silence growing. She felt she knew exactly what her sister was about to say. It would be to answer her question. What are the means? "When I realised I couldn't have children, it felt very bleak, Elsa." There was another silence. Elsa had never thought of not being able to have children, just that, even if she did want to, perhaps she was getting too old for someone decent to come along and want to marry her. It must feel bleak, because her sister had experienced it to say so. Rosie went on. "I've heard it said, it doesn't matter where, that some women can go quite mad if they don't have a child." Good gracious me. Elsa put a hand to her chest, and I certainly didn't want to go mad, even though I might now appear to be, she said, a droll note in her voice. "I'd read the newspapers. You'll be surprised to hear of more than just suffragist interests, about some stories from Melbourne and from Sydney. From Adelaide, too, about poor women, or about fallen women, who have babies they shouldn't have had, or who'd had them and couldn't afford to keep them, so they sell them." Elsa sucked in a breath. "That's terrible." "Is it?" To try to save a child's life, or to try to save your own? Rosie took a breath. If they sell an unwanted child, or one they can't afford, they both live for a little longer. Or that's what I thought was the reason for the practice. Elsa could barely imagine where this was going. At one stage I wanted a child so badly I was staring at just about every newborn in their mother's arms, or in their carriage, in the main street of Robe. And I was feeling very strange. I didn't dare reach out to touch the infants for fear I'd snatch one up and run away with it. Elsa groped for her sister's hand, but it wasn't within reach. Did you have a madness of some sort after all? Perhaps. The idea of it was certainly driving me mad. She sniffed. I told Frank as much. And all he said to me was that there was naught to be done if my body would not take up his seed, and that I was clearly defective. That if I couldn't be trusted in public with the children who belonged to others, then I should stay behind closed doors. "Oh, dear God, Rosie!" Elsa cried. "That awful man!" Rosie took in a deep breath. So, I showed Frank the newspaper articles, said to him that I should like to buy one of these poor babies. They get sold off to baby farmers, you see, terrible people who, if you're the unfortunate woman, take your money on the promise of looking after the infant until you can buy it back and be able to support it. When it becomes clear their real mother is either no longer fit or can't be found, they sell the babies on. Or worse. Or worse what? Do you remember that terrible case reported in Sydney a few years back? The man's name was Macon. His wife was Sarah. He was hanged for murdering the babies. Elsa turned on her side to face her sister. "Rosie, that's a horrible story." "It's true. And baby farming still goes on." Rosie sucked in a deep breath. "I had it in mind to try to buy one of these babies. Maybe from Adelaide, or somewhere close by." She paused. Of course, Frank wouldn't have it. Of course not. Elsa heard Rosie's voice drift above them into the night sky. Why had she not known this about her sister and Frank? Surely, if he knew you couldn't have your own... He said that it would bring shame on him to suddenly have his wife appear with a baby that was clearly not his. Then she huffed. "Never mind about me," she said as an aside. "He said that the child would most likely be diseased and tainted with its slatternly birth mother's blood." So shocked, Elsa had nothing to say. There was no need to condemn Frank to Rosie. He'd already done that himself. She tried again to find her sister's hand and felt Rosie's fingers close over hers. So, I felt like I could either descend into my madness or try to make it so that I no longer cared. Rosie squeezed Elsa's fingers and then let them go. I don't know how well I succeeded in not going mad, because here I am running away with nary a penny to my name. But to know I no longer care for Frank. "You're not mad," Elsa said quietly. Subdued, she asked, "Are there many babies, do you think, unwanted?" "Oh yes, many. It makes me very sad." It had made Elsa sad too, and the threat of tears felt like a huge wave rolling through her. But Rosie had endured it. Poor Rosie would not want her pity. Well, it wasn't pity, it was empathy. Still, it wouldn't help to cry. Those poor children, those poor women. "Are there baby farmers everywhere?" Elsa asked. "Probably. There are, I've heard, some ladies who look after unfortunate women to try and help them keep their babies if they can. They house them, find them meaningful work, but they too are frowned upon. They have to take their work underground, so to speak." Elsa suddenly wondered why on earth she had decided to leave the sanctuary of the farm and go in search of her dead brother's belongings. The outside world seemed a dark place. Either that or she had been well sheltered from some of its horrors. "You know a lot about it, Rosie." "I do. I made it my business." But Frank refused to budge. She said he would not have it. would not abide any more talk about it. A child of his own, or none at all. And I was to accept his position on that and think of his standing in society. That was for me the last straw.
Lardy-ball,
Elsa seethed. Rosie caught her breath. But now I must try and forget all of that and get a good night's sleep. I feel quite out of sorts, dear Elsa. Abruptly, she turned away and stifled a sob. Poor Rosie. But what had she said? Dear Elsa. Not even dear little sister. Rosie had called her Dear Elsa. The next morning, Rosie was still out of sorts, but in a different way. I thought you said it can't be far, she said, sounding annoyed. She shuffled on the seat alongside Elsa, one hand holding the outside rail. There was no mention of last night's revelations. Elsa looked across. Can't be far, she reiterated, then thought she heard the rumble of thunder, and looked up. Strange, not a cloud in the sky. She craned her neck to look over her shoulder, and saw only a distant line of cloud, too far away for a storm to be heard. They'd rounded a sweeping bend, and were travelling steadily. Rosie was still talking. Well, hurry it up. The sooner we're in civilization, the better. Can't he go any faster? Elsa kept her voice even. Pepin's done a good job so far. No point pushing him now. He's got a nice, steady pace on him. Give me the reins. No, we need him to be rested. You know it as well as I do. Rosie folded her arms. That proved not a good idea, and she dropped them to hang on to the cart. You were always much better with animals than me. Elsa's brows rose at the concession. That was a first, she decided. She didn't dare comment, knowing how tired they both were. Niggling each other now would make matters worse. Not long to go now. I'm sure of it. She waited a beat. Do you hear thunder? Rosie stared at her, incredulous. No. Pepin jerked against the reins. Elsa held on. Maybe he does. I thought I did. Not willing to try and slow down the horse to listen, he was straining against her tug on his reins. Elsa gave Pepin his head. He was insistent. Yes, now I hear it, Rosie cried and looked up. But there are no clouds. Pepin whinnied, snorted, and pulled ahead. Elsa tried to hold him back, but he surged forward. Her heart leapt. He shouldn't be doing this. He should be calm. The thunder increased. But it wasn't overhead. It was behind them, the rumble of wheels over the main road. Then the crack of a whip sounded, and a man's yell urging his team faster. Oh, my Lord, a coach is behind us. No way of knowing we're here. Elsa! Rosie screamed. Pepin squealed and tried to bolt. Elsa sucked in a breath and held on. Rosie grabbed the reins with her, but the horse had spooked. He was too strong. Elsa had to let him go and just try to hang on. Pull him up! Rosie screeched. Pull him up! He'll kill us! I can't! The coach will kill us! Plough right into the back of us! A quick look over her shoulder, and the big Cobb & Co. coach, pulled by 4 galloping horses, was truly thundering behind and closing in on them. Men waved their arms madly in her direction from on top of the vehicle. Jesus Christ! Elsa heard a man bellow. Jesus Christ! Brake, man, brake! Hold the horses! Wild screams from inside the coach jolted her. Pepin, go! Elsa cried and cracked the reins hard on his rump. Their poor horse answered with all he had, and they shot forward as the coach hurtled in pursuit. And Rosie screamed, desperately hanging on, bouncing against Elsa and screaming some more. Elsa's ears were ringing so loudly with it she thought her eyes would water. Then, unbelievably, up ahead, no! 2 masked men on horses shot out of the scrub and onto the road. One with bright red hair curling out from under his hat had the butt of a rifle, sitting on the bulge of his big stomach. He blasted a shot in the air high overhead. Pepin wasn't having any of it. Not Elsa dragging on his reins, not a gun going off in front of him, not a coach hurtling towards him from behind. He ploughed ahead, blindly, terrified and squealing, heading for the horseman, until he slammed on his own brakes. The horse veered sideways across the narrow road, and still attached to his straps, the cart rocked precariously on an angle. Elsa shrieked as she pitched forward between the cart and Pepin's stomping hooves. The cart rocked from side to side, and the timbers squealed as a crack seared down the middle of one of the brace poles. Elsa's teeth rattled. Her hat flew off her head, but stayed secured under her chin. Her hair sprang out of its pins and was whipping her face. The only things that stopped her falling under Pepin were her arms hung over the rigid rails. Then he pig-rooted. A bone cracked in her foot under a hind hoof. "No, no, Pepin," Elsa breathed, scrambling out of the way. She hauled herself up, clear of Pepin's kicking, and froze. Her eyes were fixed on the flaring nostrils of badly spooked coach horses, still galloping, so close. Then she was staring into the open mouth of the coach driver, his eyes wide in horror, his teeth bared and white against his dense black beard. Death approaches swiftly. Rosie, already hurled backwards on the cart, had scuttled to the ground. As she scampered off the road, skirt clutched, stumbling, she shouted, "Run, Elsa! Run!" Elsa couldn't move. The driver's black beard seemed to move in slow motion, the man's mouth moving soundlessly. Rosie had darted back but couldn't get under Pepin's hooves. Suddenly, the other masked man, sinewy, dark-haired, now on foot, reached under the cart and dragged Elsa out by her bodice. When he flung her aside out of harm's way, she landed in a heap and let go a scream of indignation. Ignoring her, he ran back to his horse and with a leap remounted. Rosie bunched her hands in Elsa's skirt, tugging her off the dirt road. Then Pepin decided to drag the wounded cart, hopping and bobbing behind him, to the side of the road. The big coach's horses strained, and with them the vehicles slid along behind, wheels juddering, brakes locking, only yards from where Pepin was still blocking the way. Elsa braced for the terrible impact. Pepin then seemed to pop off the road, dragging the banging cart after him. The driver was roaring, and his co-driver gripped the reins with him and hauled back. They were braced. The horses, as one, slewed to a halt. Their squeals fell to heaving breaths. All other sounds fell away. The frightened yelps of panicked passengers thrown about, and the bellows from the men atop the coach grimly hanging on. It all stopped. In the silence, dust floated in a busy cloud over everything, and stones, flung high, fell like hail, the last one thudding in a puff. No lives lost, man nor beast. And in the calm, the red-haired man, still on his horse, pointed his rifle at the coachman. "Throw down your guns." His lean friend swung a rifle at the male travellers. A handgun and a rifle were suddenly tossed to the ground. "Hands in the air," he barked. All passengers' hands flew high in the air. The driver's rage erupted. "You could have killed us all, you madman," he shouted, his black beard shaking, his bushy brows twisted over flashing eyes. Elsa watched in disbelief from the dirt. Perhaps he's forgone good sense. There is, after all, a rifle pointed at him. Redhead fired another round. The boom set more screams coming from women and children inside. The coach horses jumped and snorted. Terror bulged their eyes as the co-driver wrangled the reins for control. The bushranger flicked a hand at his leaner mate, who kicked his horse close enough so he could reach down and grab the reins of the two front coach horses. "Now, toss over the mailbags," Redhead ordered the driver. "Anyone with cash and jewellery, throw it out now, or I'll make the next round count." Elsa picked herself up off the ground, hopping, while Rosie still had hold of her. Clinging together, they watched as jewellery and coins were flung out of the coach, sparkling in the sunshine before they hit the dirt road, sinking into the dust or lying in old wheel ruts. The leaner, masked man jumped to the ground and grabbed everything he could, stuffing the precious bits into his shirt. The driver tugged open the compartment under his seat and pulled out a canvas bag and flopped it onto the ground.
You and your strumpets won't get away with this,
he blared at the redhead. Then he pointed a finger at Elsa.
I'll remember your look, girlie, that's for sure. You'll not be hiding that head of hair. You won't get away with this, any of you.
Elsa stared at the driver, mouth agape, stumbling a little as she favoured her sore foot. What? She pushed at Rosie, who grabbed her again before she could lurch forward. Redhead laughed, his big belly shaking. His fiery beard was visible, straggly, and showing from behind his kerchief.
Ah, yes, my strumpets. Thanks for your help, ladies.
He leaned down towards the women.
It were all in the timing, weren't it?
Elsa could hear glee behind that mask. She hopped, gripped her sister to steady herself, her breath hissing as pain shot up her leg. Rosie was rigid beside her.
Don't say a word, Elsa. Just shut up,
she said, squeezing out her words from behind clenched teeth.
Shut up.
Then Redhead shouted to the driver over the high-pitched squeals from inside the coach.
Get on your way before my strumpets here go in to pick and choose what else you've got hidden.
Swinging his gun towards a male passenger at the back of the coach, he snarled,
Don't try it. No blood's been spilled yet. So get on your way.
Cries of, hurry up and get moving, followed by urgent arm-waving, hastened the driver into action.
No one holds up coaches anymore, he cried, shaking one fist in tangled reins. They'll catch you, you bastard. Is that right?
Redhead yelled, his horse dancing under him.
We'll make it easy for him. Tell him the name's Nebo Jones and don't forget it. Nebo Jones, he bellowed. Now get that coach moving.
The driver cracked the whip over the horse's flanks and the coach lurched forward. Fearful cries from within could still be heard. The younger bushranger clambered back onto his horse.
You daft bugger,
he shouted at his mate, and took off into the scrub. Wheeling his horse about to face Elsa and Rosie, Redhead tipped his hat, which was tied firmly under his chin.
Delighted to make your acquaintance, strumpets. You done good.
Then he too bolted into the scrub. Rosie stared after him, ducking the dust and flicking stones as coach and riders departed.
Strumpets! I'll give him strumpets if I ever lay eyes on him again.
Lucky we weren't killed, she shrieked, eyes wide, and panic had her voice shaking. She still had an iron grip on her sister. Elsa, too, stared after the red-headed thug, outrage fading as a strange thought hit her. What was the point of being masked if he was going to yell out his name?
2 rifle shots,
Nebo whispered in a growl, his stare flicking from Glenn to Fred. They'd thrown themselves off their horses and were laying low behind the rise on the other side of the road. He idly flexed gloved fingers, one hand after the other.
Yeah. Bloody dangerous git,
Fred said and spat. He wiped away a flop of hair from his forehead. The sky had clouded over again. It was still glary, and they all squinted towards where they knew the coach had been, listening as it departed, sounds fading in the distance.
Coach will be in Casterton in only a couple of hours,
Glenn said. He reached over, grabbed his hat, and plonked it on hair already moulded by where it had sat before.
We best get going if we're going to sort this out.
Nebo shook his head in disbelief.
But you heard it too, didn't you? You heard some mad bastard yell that it was me who just held up that coach.
This is the end of CD 4. The book continues on CD 5. CD 5. (18) Lily, riding hard as she crossed Ezekiel's home paddock, could see the happy children and the horse as they came down the track from the gate, home from school. She could see Ezekiel marching towards them, and she wondered if he always did that, met them on the track. Her thighs hurting brought her back to the moment. It had been a long time since she'd ridden bareback, even as long ago as in her childhood. Gripping Cricket's sides had come naturally, but she'd forgotten how difficult it was to sustain. She was so out of practice. "Ezekiel!" She tried to call, but her voice only croaked. She tried again, and this time it was a scream. She waved, crying, calling his name. It was his eldest son who saw her. He was walking ahead of the horse, leading with the reins. He waved back, then hesitated. Ezekiel turned towards her and waved too, before he realized something was terribly wrong. He waved his son over, then ran towards her. Cricket slowed on her command, and as they got closer to Ezekiel, she could see the shock on his face. "Oh God, Judah's blood is all over my clothes." "Mrs. Hartman, what—" "Come quickly, Ezekiel. It's Judah. He's been attacked." She leaned down and gripped his outstretched hand, but she didn't dismount. "Can your boy go for the doctor?" She was about to wheel Cricket around when Ezekiel grabbed his reins. "Wait. You don't look too good either." "It's not my blood, Ezekiel." She felt her panic rising. "Please, let me go back." Ezekiel wasn't letting go. "Gif!" he shouted, and the boy started at a run, the horse trotting behind, with the two younger children bobbing on its back. "Gracie, Jonty, hop off Milo, quickly now." "Please, Ezekiel, let go of—" "Mrs. Hartman, give me your horse. Gif can go for the doctor," Ezekiel said and spoke to his son. "Tell him to hurry and get to Uncle Jude's." Gif swung onto Milo's back, turned the horse and took off. The younger children stared at her. "Down you get, Mrs. Hartman," Ezekiel said quietly. "Gracie will get you a cup of tea, help you clean up a bit." He still had hold of the reins and lifted his free hand towards her, urging her to dismount. His face was creased with worry, and she could hear the urgency in his voice. Suddenly tired, she slipped off poor Cricket and caught Ezekiel's horrified look at the state of her dress. Alarmed, she glanced at the children. The young lad was wide-eyed and silent. The girl, perhaps 7 or 8 if she remembered correctly, was solemn and curious. She went to Lily and held out her hand. "We'll get you a bit washed up, Mrs. Hartman," she said in her steady, soft little voice. "I think you've swiped something over your face." "Oh dear." Lily took Gracie's outstretched hand as Ezekiel clambered onto Cricket's back. He looked down at her and said, "Wait here for me. Look after my kids." Turning the horse, he kicked him into a gallop. Look after his kids. Lily took a glance down at her dress. Judah's blood had dried on it, and where it had darkened, the fabric was stiff. She looked at Gracie, who firmly held her hand and was leading her to Ezekiel's house. Dogs barked and yipped frantically somewhere in the background. She glanced back at Jonty, who, after staring at his brother, then his father, jogged along beside to catch up to her.
"You're dirty, missus,"
he said, pointing at her skirt.
"Dirtier than me."
Lily laughed a little, cried a little. The sound of it was pathetic in her ears.
"No one's dirtier than you, Jonty Jones,"
Gracie said, matter-of-fact. He considered that for a moment, tilting his head.
"That's true,"
he said with a lisp. Jonty sneaked his hand into Lily's, and she sobbed some more, squeezing the two children's hands in hers. Then as she walked on wobbly legs towards their house, a few tears flowed for Judah. 19. Frank Putney knew he should have insisted on going out to Curtis Goody's farm with Pete Southey, but he didn't like the idea of riding out there, especially the way he'd felt. Bad enough now having to close the bakery door early, again, because of it. Closing the shop went against his every fibre, even though he knew he needed to do it. The pain in his chest had radiated earlier. And his arm had had a pain in it too, for a while. Another thing he should have done was get himself over to see the doctor. Damn that. He knew what he'd be told. Stop eating so much of your good cooking, Frank. He leaned back against the long counter in the shop. Now, admit it, Francis. It might be more than that angina thing he'd been diagnosed with. It'd be a heart attack. Well, may as well face it. Nothing would save him from that if it was going to happen. He rubbed his chest, wanting to believe that the pain was easing. Certainly he was breathing better. He took a deep breath to see how it felt. Yes, it was easier. So perhaps not a heart attack. Don't think of it as that. Was he trying to bring one on? And who would look after him now if he did become ill? Rosie, Rosie, Rosie. What a time to have a fit of crochets, he said aloud, brushing a cloud of flour from the timber bench top. You should be in the bakery where you belong, selfish woman, not running off when I need to catch my breath. He looked around at the empty bread racks, at the boxes that held bags of flour. How much money have I lost these last days? He shook his head, still rubbing his chest. You could have said you were ill again. I had no idea. God knows I can usually tell when you go off the rails. I thought you'd been well lately. He pushed off the bench and stood with hands on his hips. Oh, yes, you said you had nickels. Couldn't have been too important. I don't even remember what they were. And the shame you've brought on us. You won't be able to hold your head up. I won't forgive this, you know. When you come back, you'll have to work so hard at... He stopped. He couldn't hear Rosie's voice in his head arguing with him. How could that be? He couldn't remember the voice of the woman he'd lived with all these years. He scoffed. Well, why would he? All she did was nag. Pain bloomed across his chest, deep and unreachable. This couldn't be good. He shuffled to the door, careful not to make his heart race, but he couldn't lift his arm to pull the blind over the window. Instead, he leaned back against it, waiting. Again, the pain receded. He took another deep breath. Fear would only make it worse. Distract yourself. Pete. Pete had gone out to that dump of a farm. Come to think of it, Pete had looked a bit green around the gills too. Said he was woozy, bit of a headache. Still, he'd insisted he was fine. He'd said it looked like the place had been cleared out of all the house things. House things, buh. Rags and hand-me-downs. Damn it, I should have gone with him. He won't know what's important and what's not. What if I'm wrong about Rosie, and she and that farmy sister of hers have only gone to visit relatives after all? He might have been acting too soon. No, Rosie would have told him. Then he would have talked her out of it. Dirt poor the lot of them, especially these days, and likely to want to visit the bereaved and sponge off his bakery. All his hard work, he wasn't having any of it. Bad enough he had to support old Curtis and Elsa after the boys had gone. And those boys, lazy sods, those three brothers. Never got any work out of them, all too busy with that good-for-nothing farm. Well, with Curtis gone, and the last of the boys gone, good old George, maybe that farm was going to have some worth after all. Now that only the girls remained in the Goody family, the farm would come to him. Curtis had said, "Wait, I haven't seen the will yet." Curtis had said to Frank that he'd look after him. He wasn't fooled by that. The old boy had got Pete to witness the will probably because he couldn't read, therefore couldn't blab, so there'd be no point pressing Pete about it. But what else could Curtis do with the farm but hand it to his son-in-law? Rosie wouldn't want it. She had a job in the bakery. Correction, Frank. Rosie has left her job, and you, and gone. But she'd be back. Of course she would. And Elsa. He'd have to put her to work somewhere. He couldn't leave her on the place. She'd never manage it. The little thing, farmy or not. A woman farmer, for God's sake.
Besides, her ideas were too highfalutin. There wasn't any money there either, and it would take some considerable funds to restock it and make it work. So, as it would come to him, Rosie's husband, the only man left in the family, he needed a plan. Can't be that hard running a few sheep and cows. Once Rosie came back, tail between her legs, he'd show her what was what. That he would. He nodded. He liked that decisiveness. He liked being in control. He liked sightless. His head flung back and his mouth dropped wide open, rigid around a silent scream. A colossal explosion, deep, so deep in his chest, hurled him into the darkness and far beyond pain. Pete Southey stood inside Curtis Goody's hut. The hell? That he'd come back out here to confirm for Frank what Pete already knew and had told him as much, that the Goody women had taken off. It wasn't just that he knew, him being on Frank's orders and all. Frank needed to know what Frank needed to know. It was always the same with that fella, always wanting things done his way, right or wrong. The women had taken off. After they'd put whatever it was in his tea, that much was clear. Last thing he remembered was the woozies, enough to knock over a bloody horse. He still felt a bit beside himself, as if his brains were on the loose. But his arthritis didn't pain him quite so much as before. Had to be a good thing. He was all right. Could still ride. Walk. The ache in his head was a bitch, but it'd go. He'd had worse after a night on his homemade rum. Mischief women. Or just one woman, he reckoned, and laughed. That Elsa. She seemed the quiet one, but she'd be a handful. Had a bit of fight in her, that one. It was still hot in the late afternoon, and the dingy hut was stuffy. He pulled off his hat and rubbed his head. Dirt and sweat tangled his hair. He eyed the room. It hardly looked any different to when he'd last seen it. A cupboard drawer had been opened. The chair he'd sat in had been uprighted. The milking stool moved. They must have had something to hide to dose me up like they had. And something to hide from Frank, too. Pete snatched a piece of brown paper out of his pocket. Frank had scratched the word "will" on it for him. Pete could read. Not real well. Hardly at all, if the truth be known. But he could sign his name all right. He'd signed his name on the will as witness for old boy Goody a while back. He should be able to find it even without Frank's paper. He just couldn't read all that other curly, flowing, fancy writing. And when Frank got to the farm, then maybe, when Pete married young Miss Elsa, he too would have his future secured. Him being family then. After all, Pete had saved Frank for sure from that heart attack he was having in the smithy's shop. Now, where to start looking for the old boy's will? The girls would have been looking too, and chances were they'd already found it. Still, perhaps they missed other things that might have some value. He laughed at that too. Nothing else of value here. It wouldn't take him long to peer inside the sad furniture, or to check over the rotting horse stall not far from where old Curtis had been laid to rest. Not too many places to look. The hut was no better than a fancy humpy. So maybe the young Miss Elsa would be pleased to marry him now. Would be a step up in the world for her after this place. He checked the light outside. Even if he found something, he'd have to wait for tomorrow before he reported it to Frank. He knew the baker went to bed early and would get up in the wee hours before dawn to set the ovens firing. Better get on with it. Better get back to town for a good kip overnight and an early rise, because Frank would want to know quick, first thing tomorrow. Wouldn't do no harm to getting good with his future brother-in-law. 20. Elsa was on her backside in the dirt, on the roadside, staring at her left foot. She could feel the pressure building in her boot and knew it'd have to come off. If the bone was broken, somehow she'd have to bandage it. Somehow she'd have to manage.
Pepin seemed content, dragging the injured cart with him a few feet here and there as he found another clump of grass to chew. Rosie was on her knees, her hands on Elsa's shoulders. "That was terrifying," she said, her voice breaking. "The coach, a horse dragging the cart, those men, gunshots." Elsa nodded, out of breath as she caught up with herself. "Dear God, the coach could have killed us, not to mention the armed men." "Elsa!" Rosie screamed, and in fright scrambled back, plucking at her sister's sleeve. 3 men on horseback had sauntered out of the scrub onto the road. Elsa shrugged her off and stared. Oh no, more trouble, all wearing loose bandanas around their throats. It was another strange thought, like the last she'd had as that fat bushranger galloped off. What had that been, being masked and... "Ladies." One man greeted and lifted gloved fingers to his hat. "You both all right?" He looked over his shoulder to the scrub on the other side and back again. His gaze flicked from Elsa to Rosie, who promptly scooted a little further away. His stare remained on Rosie. Interest flared in his dark eyes. Oh no. "Yes," Elsa answered curtly. Another man said, "Looks like you might need a bit of work on your cart." Unruly hair flopped across his eyes. He pushed it back and lifted his chin towards Pepin, who had been grazing calmly, not the slightest bit bothered by the presence of the other horses. Now Pepin was glancing back, as if at the split shaft of one of the poles which was still attached, as if acknowledging what the man had said. The man sidled his horse alongside, murmuring low. He leaned over, patted Pepin's rump, then dismounted and began to inspect the long poles. "We can manage," Elsa croaked, still with her wary eye on the man who'd tipped his hat. A quick glance at her sister, and she could see Rosie was just as transfixed with him. The man, hands clad in scuffed leather, flicked the reins and his horse stepped closer. "Can you get up?" he asked Elsa. He stopped and slid to the ground. Elsa shook her head. "Our horse stomped on my foot. I think there's a bone broken." He nodded, but his gaze was back on Rosie. The blonde-haired man dismounted and pushed back his hat, revealing dark blonde hair that resembled a thatched roof. He stood, hands on his hips, checking on the road left and right and peering into the bush on the other side. He brushed flies away and over his shoulder said to Elsa, "Heard gunshots and a coach charge off. Trouble?" He knew very well there'd been trouble. Elsa began tightly. "We were driving along," Rosie erupted, "minding our own business, and the blasted coach came roaring up behind us, spooking our horse and—" "Let me help you up." The man with the gloves bent to Rosie and offered his hand, his voice kind, his smile friendly. As soon as the hand encased his sister's and Rosie was gently tugged to her feet, she was struck dumb. Her eyes were only for the dark-haired man, and Rosie, as long as Elsa had known her, had never, ever been struck dumb. The man with Pepin called over, "I should be able to strap this with something here, then fix it proper like once we get back to camp." He was pointing at the split pole. "I reckon I could repair it, or build something new." He patted the horse again, "And the horse is unhurt. Should be no problem." "Camp?" Elsa was querulous. "We're not going to some men's camp." "Elsa, shush!" Astounded, Elsa stared across at Rosie, who was now on her feet. Her sister, still gazing at the man who had her hand, smiled at him. "Thank you," she said. "Rosie, help me up!" Elsa snapped, sure her starry-eyed sister was going to tell this stranger who they were. Her foot was throbbing like the blazes, grateful for the help. And she was still smiling. "Rosie?" The blonde-haired man had been surveying the road. He jogged over to the other side and peered at tracks in the dirt. "Looks like they're headed off this way." Yes, Rosie said, managing to detach herself from that gloved hand to offer her arm to Elsa. As soon as they'd picked up all the things the passengers had thrown out, they rode off in a hurry, and not that long ago either. She gave the dark-haired man a tentative smile as Elsa tried to get up. At least we know the name of one of them. We can let the troopers know.
What did he look like?
The man at the tracks asked, and when Rosie gave him a stare, he said,
Beg pardon, my name's Glenn Barton.
Elsa was struggling to stand until Rosie's man helped pull her up. Annoyed, she said, They both wore masks. As soon as she'd made the remark, Mr. Barton then removed his bandana and wiped his face with it before casually tucking it in his pocket. But one was a big man around here, she said, holding her arms out in front of her, hopping a little to balance, with red hair. She continued and looked down at the man by the cart. His bandana was also disappearing down his shirt front, his hand shoving it inside.
He said his name was Kneebone Jones,
Rosie said. Elsa sputtered quietly at her sister.
"'Twas a Kneebone, Rosie."
Mr. Barton let out a bark of laughter.
Kneebone!
He cried, highly amused. He called across to the man at the cart with Pepin.
Hey, Fred! Kneebone Jones held up the coach.
Fred nodded, wide-eyed and looking very concerned.
He's a terror for sure, that Kneebone Jones.
Aye, all right, lads, very funny.
The dark-haired man said. He turned to Elsa.
Our womenfolk back at the camp can look at your foot. That way, Fred over there can take his time working out how to get your cart on the road so you can be on your way.
Rosie let out a breath. Oh, you're womenfolk. Elsa couldn't believe her ears. Was she disappointed? He turned those dark eyes of his on Rosie.
The boys' wives, he said and nodded at Glenn and Fred. And there's Wally back there too, with his wife. 7 of us all together.
And then he smiled at her again. Elsa suspected Rosie could add up without asking the obvious. Her sister, satisfied, returned his stare, and then she smiled too, her cheeks blooming with colour. This smiling! Rosie, for heaven's sake! Elsa nudged her. Help me to the cart, would you? And together they shuffled over. Elsa perched on the step and rubbed her ankle, which didn't do anything to ease the throbbing. The boot would have to come off, and soon, and that was that. But until she knew what was happening, she was reluctant to remove her footwear, especially not to reveal her feet to these men. That was simply not done. Fred was peering into the back of the cart.
Have you got an old whip I could unravel or any rawhide? I can tie something around the pole and maybe, if we're careful, we can keep the horse harnessed and just walk him back.
Leather straps in that box, Elsa said, pointing it out. Better the pole was repaired than not. How far is your camp?
Less than an hour.
The dark-haired man addressed Elsa.
Who might you be, miss?
At first, Elsa thought not to answer. Then she thought it wouldn't matter if she hung on to some security. Miss Elsa Conroy, and this is my sister, Rosie said quickly. I'm her older sister.
Miss Conroy? He addressed Elsa. Perhaps if you can climb into the cart, we'll head off for camp.
Would you take us into Casterton where we can find a doctor and lodgings? Elsa asked. A reasonable request, surely. The 3 men fell silent. The dark-haired man looked at the other 2. Fred shrugged. Glenn raised his eyebrows, then shook his head. Rosie took Elsa's arm, steering her to the back of the cart. Elsa pulled her arm away. But I think going into Casterton is a very good idea, she said. Rosie kept her voice low. Elsa, that's a bit ungrateful. Ungrateful? We don't know these people. Elsa shot back, just as low. We don't know any people outside of Robe. Rosie spat. The dark-haired man, with his eye on Rosie again, said,
I won't be taking you into Casterton. Not now, that's certain. And when your cart's fixed, we'll just give you directions."
"Why's that?" Elsa demanded, while easing herself up into the cart, backside first. As soon as she was in, her boot would be coming off. Glenn walked with Fred's horse and his own and fell in alongside the cart.
"Because, Miss Conroy," he answered Elsa, "once that coachload of people gets into Casterton, they'll start talking their heads off, and it'll be all over the town and the district that Nebo Jones bailed it up."
"Quite right," Elsa muttered. "He'll get his comeuppance." She tugged at her bootlaces. Fred walked to his mount and handed the reins to Glenn, then headed back to Pepin. To Rosie he said, "You'll have to go on foot, miss," and began to lead the cart slowly into the scrub. It juggled over the stiff clumps of dried grass on uneven ground. Rosie leaned over the side to Elsa.
"Have you forgotten that the coach driver also accused us of being part of the hold-up? Our being strumpets and all?"
Elsa shut her mouth. The dark-haired man said,
"Nebo Jones didn't bail up that coach."
Elsa laughed, her bravado returning. "Oh, here we go. I heard him bellow as much."
"That may be,"
he said, mounting and nudging his horse to walk behind the cart with Rosie.
"But that's not his name. If it's who I think it is, his name's Billy Watson. I am Nebo Jones."
That's what Elsa had been thinking when the bushrangers who'd held up the coach galloped off. Why would they cover their faces with bandanas, or kerchiefs, or whatever they were called, only to have one of them shout out his supposed name for all to hear? It made no sense. So perhaps this Mr. Jones here was telling the truth. As the cart trundled along in the mid-afternoon, Elsa pulled off her hat to fan her face. It kept the flies away, momentarily at least, but loose wisps of her hair became annoying. There was nothing but her hat to keep it in some sort of order now, so, aware of the sun beating down, she slapped it back on her head. Mr. Jones. A common enough name. That was also the name on the letter advising of George's death. The letter writer's name, Jones, would really have been his right name. You wouldn't sign a letter like that and not tell the truth of who you were. Perhaps this Mr. Jones, playing up to my sister, has just picked out a common name to disguise his real identity. Best keep your wits about you, Elsa Goody. Someone had to here, and it didn't seem like it would be Rosie. It appeared her sister's wits had evaporated. She was showing signs of being fairly taken by the so-called Nebo Jones, all eyes a-fluttering and still smiling, what's more. How could that be so? She'd only just left her husband of many years. What about the deaths in the family? It was beyond Elsa's power of reasoning, although Elsa could see Mr. Jones as he conversed with Rosie. Dark wavy hair, a little unkempt, his face without a shave for possibly a couple of days. He looked like he was a man on the land, or at least someone who spent a good deal of his time outside. His face and neck and his forearms were sun-browned, and his eyes crinkled deeply when he laughed. There was a lively look in them, certainly when he gazed at Rosie. Elsa didn't get the feeling that this was the letter-writing Mr. Jones. Pleasant-looking, I suppose, though nothing to set the world on fire. Not that Rosie could marry again even if she wanted to, not right away anyway. But what were this man's intentions? What were his prospects? Intentions? Prospects? For goodness sake. A long stare at each other and I have my sister married off to a stranger. A stranger with a strange name. Nebo. Then again, you don't hear of Ezekiel too much either. The other Mr. Jones's name. Would they be related? Now was not the time to ask. She'd keep things to herself. Hopefully, Rosie would too. As the cart bobbed along, Fred was talking to Pepin as if they were old mates. When she sneaked a look, he'd been stroking the horse's mane and patting his neck. He'd whispered sweet somethings into Pepin's flicking ears, and the dear, faithful old horse seemed to love it. And Mr. Barton and this Nebo Jones person were chatting affably to Rosie, chatting as if on an afternoon picnic. They'd moved ahead, so Elsa was now behind them in the back of the cart, watching the receding road.
"Looks like a good horse you have here, miss."
Mr. Barton's voice. "We do. He's wonderful," Rosie said. "We've had him since a foal. He's getting on a bit now."
"Wise and reliable, then. He seems very sensible, and looks like he's been well looked after."
Mr. Jones's voice. Elsa imagined he had turned to smile at Rosie.
"So, where have you come from today?"
"Oh no, the Inquisition. Today? Well, somewhere between here and Panola." At least Rosie seemed to have the good sense to stop there and not to divulge anything.
"Panola?"
Mr. Jones again.
"You've taken a wrong turn somewhere to end up here on this road."
"We were heading to Casterton to speak to a lawyer on a matter in the Victorian colony's jurisdiction," Elsa said loudly over her shoulder. She could almost feel Rosie's glare, but at least her sister had shut up. Chat rolled on about the weather, about the land in the area needing drains, the crop prices falling. Elsa knew about all those things but refrained from joining in. Rosie knew about bakeries, and therefore wasn't offering too much except for "imagine" and "is that right?" Elsa was happy to be ignored. While she nestled into the bedding with her ear on Rosie's contributions to the light conversation, she bent her knee and took to her boot again. No one would see if she slipped it off and checked her foot. As she loosened the laces a little more than she had earlier, she realized that once she removed the boot, she might not get it back on again. She had nothing to strap her foot, and decided to wait until they arrived at camp, where this Wally and the wives were, for help. At least with the boot not tied so tight, her foot felt some relief. She tried to relax, and closed her eyes for only a few moments.
"Not far now, miss,"
Fred called. Elsa snapped awake. The sun was low, so she dozed for a while. The odour of wood smoke somewhere close curled around her, and she sat up, groggy, twisting to see what was ahead. Mr. Barton had ridden off, and the horse's hooves sounded hollow on the hard earth.
"Do you hear that, Nebo?"
Fred stopped and stood high in the stirrups.
"That's mad yells from the camp."
He kicked his horse and took off. Nebo stopped his horse.
"Jesus."
He stared after Fred. Rosie leaned over the side of the cart to her sister. "Do you hear it?" Elsa nodded. The hairs on her forearms were standing up as she stared back at Rosie. Mad yells, yes, they were, rolling over and over. The wails of someone in extreme distress. 21. Zeke flung himself off Mrs. Hartman's horse, threw the reins off, and hurled towards Jude's open door.
"Jesus Christ,"
he hissed at the sight of blood on the floor. There was a trail under his feet. Another trail was headed in the opposite direction, out the back door. Then he saw the knife. His brother's boning knife, dull with red smears.
"Jude, where—"
A cough. Out the back door. He heard a voice, wheezing,
"Damn it. Jude! It's me, Zeke,"
he called out, sidestepping the drying blood. He edged to the back wall, now not sure if it was his brother outside, and not sure if whoever it was had a gun. Just then his boot landed on something soft. He'd squashed a pie of some sort.
"Judah?"
Taking a breath, he sidled into the doorway and chanced to look outside. Slumped with his back against the wall, there was Jude. His face was white, but he was alive. He was breathing. There wasn't any more blood streaming from him.
"Took your time." "I just knew you'd say that."
Zeke dropped to his knees.
"Where's the cut?"
"On the side.
Lower back,"
Jude said between breaths.
"Hope he didn't nick anything important. Bled like a bastard."
Zeke eased an arm behind Jude's shoulders and pulled him forward.
Mrs. Hartman strap you up.
He could see the blood had stopped running and that the patch of cloth, while soaked, had also begun to dry off. Jude nodded.
Fine job. Nice pies, too.
He held an uneaten pie on his lap.
Not wrong with you if you're thinking of your stomach.
Zeke studied the cloth stuffed against the wound and the belt wrapped around his brother's waist. It should stay there until Giff brought Dr. Smith.
What are you doing outside?
He helped settle his brother as comfortably as he could, then slid down against the wall until he was on his arse beside him.
Didn't want to stay sat in my own blood. Managed it. A bit weak, but I feel all right.
Like I'm convinced of that.
Giff's gone for the doc. Yeah. You know who did it?
Zeke asked, swiping a forearm under his nose.
The dead boy's pa. Elsa Goody. That's him.
Jude wheezed.
Bastard came back. Crept up on me, saying he knows George had money and papers that belonged to the family. Said he was going to go look for George's belongings. And maybe they'd been hid somewhere. Accused me of stealing.
Christ, he's looking for something. Zeke had already taken Goody to where George was buried, on his own property. Would he want to go there again? It'd have to wait. Zeke wouldn't leave Judah, not at least until the doctor had come. Still, he'd left his 2 younger kids at his place, on their own with Lily. But if Giff got the doc, it wouldn't be long before they'd be here. Maybe half hour at the most. He checked the sky. Still plenty of daylight. 3 or more hours. As soon as his boy arrived, and the doctor reckoned Jude was all right for an hour or 2, he and Giff would head home. First thing Zeke could do was notify the troopers. Wrong. Second thing. The first thing was making sure his kids were all right. After the troopers, then he'd go after this bastard himself. Jesus, what was the rest of the family like if this was the father? But he hadn't picked up anything nasty about them from George, not about his father, and especially not about one of his sisters from the way the lad had sobbed for her. Zeke wished he'd caught her name properly. He checked Jude again. He was trying to raise his arm to take a bite of the pie. Zeke took the pie, broke off a piece and angled it into his brother's mouth. Jude chewed slowly. Zeke asked, "So what happened?" He sat the remainder of the pie in Jude's lap.
Don't know, really. I told him I knew nothing about whatever the lad had with him, that I was still away when my brother found him, and to get the hell off my land.
Jude stopped to catch his breath. Jude had just told Curtis Goody that he'd been away when George was found. At the gravesite, Zeke had told Goody that his brother had found George. Wouldn't take a genius to figure out there was a third brother, or that possibly someone was lying. Either way, Zeke would have to find Nebo before this madman did. George had touched them all. Jude was staring at the little pie in his lap.
What was Lily Hartman doing here?
Zeke glanced at him.
She tends your girls' graves when you go off on your little wanderings.
Jude let out a deep sigh, closed his eyes.
Was she all right when she got to you? Out of breath? Unhappy? Why?
Zeke jolted upright.
Was she here when... No. The next thing after I got the knife in me back, he's headed up the track to where the graves are.
Jude looked at Zeke.
Then I'm waked up by Lily, who's standing over me. If she was at the graves, she might have seen him.
So, Mrs. Hartman as well might be in his sights. Zeke tapped his thigh. Thought of Gifford. Come on, lad. Come on, hurry up. He leaned over and peered at his brother's side. No fresh blood. But move that swabbing and who knows what had happened. Sweat broke over his forehead. He took off his hat and sat it on his brother's head.
Wait there.
Jude gave an amused grunt.
Funny.
Zeke tramped inside, found Jude's hat on the hook behind the door. He stared out the window in the direction he knew Giff would be coming. Dust was rising from the track. That'd be his boy for sure. Back outside, he replaced Jude's hat for his and clamped on his own.
Could have picked a shady spot. Could have. Meant to build that lean-to, but never got round to it.
Never did. Zeke squatted again.
We'll get it done the next few months. My kids are keen for it. They're good kids. Those boys are a chip off your block. And that Gracie might have owned that one.
Jude sucked in air, winced.
Hold him close, Zeke. There's nothing more important. Once they're gone, there's no getting them back.
Zeke's chest expanded and tears sprang.
I know it, Jude.
He pressed a hand to his brother's shoulder. He swallowed down the pressure in his throat.
Nothing comes before my kids.
Taking a deep breath to steady himself, he aimed a thumb over his shoulder.
And I reckon that's Giff, coming up the track, not a mile off. Not long to go now, old mate. Then we'll clean up here, get you home to mine.
He stared at his brother, whose eyes had closed, and his heart gave a solid thump.
Jude!
22. Pete Southey was kicking dirt in the front of the bakery.
I had to oversleep, didn't I? Damn it.
Frank would be spitting brimstone. And at having to open the store on his own. Maybe that's why the doors were still closed. He stared at the women hovering around the bakery door, peering inside. Without Rosie on hand, Frank would be running behind.
That Rosie, she really left poor Frank in a state. Has to do all this work himself now.
Pete knew not to go in the front way and began to walk down the alleyway between the bakery and the saddlery. Frank had always made him come around the back, but something about the shoppers huddled before the door made him stop and head back that way. A grim-faced, dumpy lady in her brown and patched day dress stepped aside as he approached.
"We can see his boots,"
she said, alarmed.
"He's on the floor."
Pete marched onto the footpath past the other ladies, nose to the pane on the door, his breathing clouding it a little. He rubbed the glass. As he squinted, he reckoned that he was staring at Frank's lifeless body. Mr. Benson kept banging a molten horseshoe on the anvil with his hammer.
"And I'm telling you, Pete Southey," he yelled, "I ain't handing over no coffin if I don't know how I'm going to get paid for it."
Pete held up his hands.
"You know the bakery's good for it." "I know the bakery's good for it, but not you." The constable said it'll just take some time for a magistrate to get to Frank's affairs. Everybody knows his missus is gone. Took off, they reckon. Not coming back. So who's going to pay for a coffin?
He stopped banging the hammer and jutted his chin towards an assortment of coffins standing by the far wall.
"How much is it?"
Southey asked.
"Won't get much change from a fiver."
The hammer clanged and bounced back off the horseshoe taking shape. Soot and glowing sparks leapt into the stifling air. Young Henry Benson smirked at him.
"Has to be a big coffin," he said. "That's why it's a fiver."
Pete Southey wasn't real sure about the truth of that, but there was nothing he could do about it. He knew right where he could get £5 too. He knew how to get into the bakery. He weren't no thief, not really. Not when folk would be looking out for Frank in the bakery, but he knew there was money in the till, and if it meant Frank would have a decent burial, then he'd go get it. Frank had been good to him, least he could do. He'd nip into the bakery, dark of night, and lift a fiver. Or two if there was two. To pay for anything extra required, of course.
"You have to measure him up,"
Pete said.
"I don't,"
Mr. Benson yelled.
"That'll fit him."
He thrust the hammer at the tallest, widest pine box.
"When will I get paid? Dunno where his missus has gone."
A man with a long white beard approached. It was the retired solicitor, Mr. Milton.
"Frank Putney's wife, do you mean? I know where she's gone,"
he said, and stepped up to the anvil. He looked at Mr. Benson.
"I need you to make me 6 more of the railway spikes from a shed.
The smithy nodded, threw down his hammer, picked a pencil out of his pocket, and made a note on a piece of raw timber.
"Will do,"
he yelled. The man went on.
"I passed those Goody girls on the road to Panola, maybe 3 or 4 days back."
He looked at Pete.
"Someone will have to tell Mrs. Putney she's a widow now. There's a will to be read and all that."
Pete Southey had opened his mouth to say something to Mr. Milton, then shut it abruptly. All manner of things rushed through his head. Rosie would be a rich widow. Elsa was unmarried. There was money in the bakery till to get Frank buried, and the funeral could happen while he was off looking for the 2 sisters. Tonight, he would get into the bakery and get that money for this damn fool smithy.
"I'll get you your money, Mr. Pinson,"
he said, and he couldn't help his lip curling. He turned to Mr. Milton.
"They were going to Panola." "They were. To relatives there and then on to Narra Court. Coming back here after that, I thought."
Pete would get the priest fella, or the vicar, or whatever he was called, to get the councilmen to dig a grave in that fancy walled cemetery. Soon as that was done, he'd take off for the farm, then go after the women. No point trying to run the bakery, but he'd be able to look after the farm for Elsa when he brought her back. He'd make himself useful. She'd like that. She'd be grateful. He wouldn't mind living on their place. Now there's a thought. A man had to have prospects after all. He'd have to take opportunities where he found them. 23. Elsa couldn't shake her goosebumps. The person's pain was palpable in that wail of theirs. Nebo Jones leaned down from his horse towards her sister.
"I'm going to go check what's going on. Wait here."
He wheeled and followed Fred at a gallop. Rosie clasped her hands. "What do you make of those cries? They sound like... I don't like the sound of them." The yells were incessant, crowding Elsa's thoughts. "We can't be far from the camp if we can hear that. I'm sure I could walk." "No," Rosie cried. "What if those terrible bushrangers have found where these people live and—" "Oh, stop it!" Elsa shimmied herself down to the end of the cart and worked the latch free on one side. She shuffled over to the other side and edged down, trying not to put any weight on her sore foot. "If you find me a start stick, I can use it to hobble a little." Tut-tutting, Rosie climbed down from the driver's seat and scouted the area for something suitable. Elsa tested her foot, but the throbbing was beginning to make her dizzy. That would clear, she told herself, and took a couple of deep breaths, steadying herself on the cart. The wails were coming every few minutes. Rosie thrust a sturdy, dry limb at her, and Elsa grabbed it, testing again. Better. If only she could keep her feet on even ground, she might be able to limp along. She took a couple of tentative steps. "Where are you going?" Rosie shrilled. The distressed cries rose in the air around them. "I'm heading towards that poor person, wherever they are," Elsa said. "Nebo told us to stay here." "Nebo did he? What about Pepin? We can't leave him," Rosie said, her voice rising even higher. "Pepin will be fine. We'll come back for him. He won't go anywhere if you sling the reins over that tree branch. Then come help me." Elsa began to shuffle away. Pepin secured, Rosie ran to Elsa and slipped under her arm. Steadily, they made their way over the dry, sand-like soil, avoiding dips and mounds to keep Elsa on her feet. Rosie froze as a man on a horse came galloping towards them. It was Nebo Jones, trailing 2 riderless horses behind him.
"We have to get you into the camp quick. I'll help you up,"
he said to Elsa, and slid to the ground.
"Being ladies, you know all about birthing babies."
At the camp, Elsa waited until Rosie, with Nebo Jones, helped her dismount. She took the stick Rosie had brought with her and adjusted her stance until she could move with some confidence. Waving Nebo away, she limped and hopped until she came to a swathe of canvas thrown over some tree branches. It created a tent of sorts that sheltered the woman crying on the other side from view. A man paced at the side of the tent, shaking his hands as if to bring back circulation. At the sound of a wild yell, the man stared at Elsa.
"That's my missus. That's Sal. Baby's coming early."
The wails reduced to whimpers until another contraction grasped the woman. Elsa bit her lip. She'd told Nebo Jones before they left the cart that she only knew about cows and calves, not about human babies. He'd said, "That's good enough." Now she glanced back at Rosie, who lifted her shoulders, her face pinched. Her sister would know even less. Her gaze shifted to another woman who hovered a distance away, whose strawberry blonde hair was twisted high on her head.
"I'm Tilly. I don't know much either. Never had my own yet. Poor Sal's been screaming for a long time now. She wouldn't settle, so Alice went in for the doctor, or the midwife. I sat with Sal a bit, but couldn't do nothing."
Dear God. Elsa looked at Nebo Jones, standing well back from where she was. Fred and Glenn were standing with him.
"How far away is a doctor?" she called.
"Hour there, hour back,"
Nebo said.
"A midwife?"
"Same, if she's sober." "Can you do something?"
the man by the tent asked Elsa. His big hands clenched and unclenched by his side. Then he looked at Rosie, who shook her head.
"You're women, ain't you?"
he burst, anger flaring from him.
"Ain't you supposed to know what to do?"
Tilly shrank away. Rosie sucked in a sharp breath. Elsa hobbled a little closer to the tent. The roar through the last contraction had faded to puffs and groans.
"Get me something to sit on," she said to him, no longer hesitant, "and something I can make a lather with."
The man bolted for a pile of pots and boxes and yanked up a billy can. He found a water bowl.
"What are you going to do?"
Rosie shrilled at her.
"We are going to go behind that canvas and hold her hand. Then I might have to pull that baby out."
Colour drained from Rosie's face.
"I can't. You can't. If the baby can't come out on its own, it'll have to have help."
Rosie grabbed Elsa by the arm.
"You don't know anything about this,"
she hissed.
"No, I don't,"
Elsa snapped back.
"But look at those useless clods,"
she said, and flicked a hand towards the others.
"No one else does either."
Rosie didn't turn. She kept staring at Elsa, a hand at her throat. And when they both heard another wail beginning, the man rushed back and thrust a crude stool Elsa's way.
"Put it in there by her feet," she said, and pointed at the canvas.
"Not going inside. That's women's business."
He stood like a dumb beast, the stool thrust out. Elsa glared.
"Did you put that baby in there?"
she demanded, hopping on one foot and pointing again at the canvas enclosure.
"Elsa,"
Rosie breathed, the shock clear in her voice. Tight-lipped, the man gave a curt nod, and Elsa returned his scowl.
"Then you can damn well witness the result of that and do the least bit more and help her. Put that seat in there for me to sit on," she ordered, "so that I can try and get your baby out."
He glanced at the other men, his face flaming, his mouth still closed in a grim line. Then he ducked behind the canvas, stool in tow. Elsa heard a female voice pant.
"Wally, I told you, this isn't good. I know, this isn't good."
A noise emitted from him before he swung back out from behind the tent.
"I'll get that ladder,"
he said to Elsa, his face no longer red, but white and sweaty.
"Help me get in there, Rosie. Then hurry up that fool with the soapy water. I know he's frightened, but he's not useless."
"I'm frightened, much less him," Rosie said, twisting her hands. "You're still so plain-spoken."
"Plain-spoken gets the job done, and you will not be frightened. We'll be helping this poor girl and her babe."
She looked around. Everyone else appeared to have abandoned Sal. Rosie smiled a little. It seemed to light her face.
"Baby."
Sal let out another yell. Rosie dropped the smile, lifted the canvas, and stepped aside for Elsa.
"In you go, then."
Taking a deep breath and hopping past her sister, Elsa saw Sal, exhausted, was on her hands and knees. Dark red streaks marked the inside of her thighs, and her dress bunched at her waist. Blood pooled in the earth underneath her, as if her body had torn as the baby tried to come out. The woman turned her head, stared up bleakly, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her face was crumpled, sweat bubbled on her brow, and her cheeks were ruddy. Rosie stepped in beside Elsa, still holding up the tarp. "Oh." Elsa angrily shooed the flies that buzzed close by. "Rosie, get some drinking water too." Rosie drew a ragged breath, her eyes on the labouring woman a moment. Then she dropped the canvas and disappeared. Elsa eased down to the stool. "I'm Elsa, Sal. I'll help all I can." Sal, her dark blonde hair slipping from a tie made of twine, stared back. "Pleased to meet you. Just get it out," she said, sobbing with the effort. "I think it's dead." Elsa looked between the woman's legs. She could see a small crown. Rosie called out, "I have the soap and water." Another wail started, but stopped as Sal strained, her neck corded in the effort to push as the contraction bore down. "Quick, Rosie!" Elsa cried. She slipped off the little seat and onto her knees, her sore foot paining sharply as it bent under her. Rosie burst in, shoving the bowl of water and a pannikin at Elsa. She dared a look at Sal. Oh, God. "Get the cup of water to her." Elsa sat awkwardly on one knee, so her broken foot wasn't in as much agony. "Support her under the arms at her shoulders." Rosie bent and helped Sal take a few slurps, then shuffled behind her. Plunging her hands in the bowl of water, Elsa scrubbed furiously with a square of hard soap to make a lather. She shuffled forward to be right at Sal's thighs, and at the next push, she eased her fingers in alongside the crowning head. The head kept coming, and she felt deeper for the little shoulders, wrapping her struggling fingers around them. Amid Sal's next agonized yell, the contraction clamped, and the baby pushed out and into Elsa's hands. Sal collapsed into Rosie's arms, and they sank sideways to the ground. Elsa glanced at her sister. Rosie's gaze was on her, hopeful, expectant. There was nothing. No yells, no crying. Only silence. Silence. Holding the perfectly formed baby in her lap, Elsa knew that the tiny infant girl was long asleep and peaceful. Her little face was lifeless. 24. Elsa watched as Fred walked Pepin and the cart through the scrub to the camp and felt some relief. She was glad to see her horse and to know their possessions were still intact. Fred took the horse to a tree and tied off his reins. Glenn Barton helped to unharness him. There was quiet in the camp, a hush born out of misery. Away from the others, Elsa was sitting on a rough bench. Rosie was at her feet, carefully wrapping a bandage around Elsa's bruised and battered left foot, the clear mark of a curved hoof on it. Rosie's face was still blotchy and red, her eyes swollen and squishy looking after an hour of gulping great, silent sobs, out of sight of the others. She sniffed and said in a ragged whisper, "You're lucky Pepin didn't crush your whole foot. Perhaps it's as you say. Only one bone broken. All your toes moved bar one." She grabbed up Elsa's torn stocking and refitted it carefully. "It's as modest as I can make it, Elsa," she said and stood up. "You should keep it out of sight, though." "It's a damn broken foot, Rosie," Elsa said dismissively, tiredly. "It has no need of being modest." "That's the second time you have resorted to swearing in the last couple of hours," Rosie said, rubbing her hands over and over. She twisted her wedding ring, stopped, twisted it again. "And why not? Oh, for goodness sake." The dead baby's little face appeared in her mind again, and she closed her eyes. They had both just been a part of something sad and terrible. What is a glimpse of a female foot to anyone here in the light of such a tragedy? I know, but... Rosie glanced at the canvas again. Distraught, Rosie had been all for removing the baby from its mother, and as soon as possible. Custom says it's best, she'd whispered urgently. Ella had almost barked at her to leave Sal and the baby alone. There was no pressing matter once the afterbirth had been delivered. Wally had taken that away and buried it, before returning to sit with Sal, who cradled their tiny child. Elsa was sure they'd know the right time to let the baby go, and to bury her. Because the infant was born dead, there was no requirement to register her, even if they'd wanted to. Elsa asked if they'd name her, but Sal had only looked blank. Rosie's hands kept moving. Still, it is not proper to show your bare legs or feet. Things have not been proper since before we left home, Rosie, Elsa said hoarsely. The hurried burial of their father, Rosie insisting she was leaving Frank, the drugging of Pete Southey. The poor mother, Rosie breathed. Surely it must deeply pain her to hold that little body. I can't imagine. She looked to be close to tears again. Elsa had no experience of these things, but when she thought back to her animals, their sometimes difficult deliveries, and their reactions to a dead baby, it made sense what Sal was doing. She'll let her go when she can, I suppose, she said. She must at some point. The sight of Sal holding the baby and rocking her, crooning softly, and Wally, sitting with his back turned, would stay with Elsa for a long time. I don't think I could bear it, Rosie said softly, her voice breaking to a sob. She sat beside Elsa and covered her face with her hands. Losing a child. All that time inside you. All the hope. Elsa put her arm around Rosie's shoulder. For a few moments they sat in the quiet of the afternoon. There was barely a rustle of breeze in the trees, and flies buzzed past, ignorant of the heartbreak. It is a tragedy, she said, and thought of their parents, of what they'd had to endure. Rosie sat up straight, wiping her eyes clean of tears. I know I will never go through that, and hope you never suffer what just happened. But so many things are changing, Elsa. There are so many things I feel now. Things I didn't know I could feel. She stopped then. I'll sponge off those spots of blood from your dress, Elsa. I hope the stains come out. Elsa's dress hadn't suffered much from the birth of the baby, but Sal would have to have clean clothes. Rosie had seen to rinsing the poor woman's chemise. It would have to do for the time being. And it was drying in the sunshine at the back of Sal and Wally's tent. Elsa had helped Sal remove the soiled undergarment, and then assisted clothing her in her day dress as best she could. Sal had not wanted to relinquish her child to do either. The blanket on which she'd lain to give birth would have to be burned. Tilly wandered over with 2 tin cups of tea, and once they were in the sister's hands, she pulled out a flask of something from her pocket. Might dull the pain in your foot a bit, miss, she said to Elsa with a lift of her chin. Elsa took a sniff, only of the contents of the flask, and thought that was pain relief enough. Rosie dropped a splash in her tea, then nodded at Nebo Jones. He looked as if he'd been waiting to approach. I'm grateful to you, he said to Elsa, and glanced furtively at Rosie, who kept her head down, her chin still puckered. So's Wally, although he can't speak it. Elsa nodded, her ire rising. She hadn't helped Sal. She'd just sat there and caught a dead infant. What help was that? Here they were in this stranger's camp, with the poorest of people. She, crippled by a broken foot at a coach hold-up, her sister starry-eyed over some scruffy bushman and now deeply distressed by the death of this poor babe. Their brother dead and buried somewhere in this region with a tin of gold sovereigns, and their father gone to his own grave, a sad and lonely, sick old man. A woman rider shot into the camp on a sturdy roan. Fred dropped the draft poles of the cart and ran to grab the reins of her horse. As she swung down, hanging onto Fred, she looked about and stared at Elsa and Rosie. Then she found Nebo. "I couldn't get the doctor." "No matter now, Elsa," Fred said, steadying her. "The baby was dead before being born." "Oh, no," she said and shook his arms. Her glance darted to the canvas drape. "Jesus, poor Sal." She took a moment, then she looked at Nebo. "I couldn't get the doctor because he'd gone off with your nephew. Your brother's been knifed by a madman." Nebo stared at her, dumbfounded. Glenn strode over from Elsa's cart. "Which brother?" he barked. "Not Ezekiel, the other one. The one what's just come back to his farm." "Judah." Nebo turned and seized the reins of Alice's horse from Fred. Glenn grabbed his arm. "Nebo, wait. You can't go. The coach held up. Billy Watson screamed it was you. Soon as the troopers know Jude's in trouble, they'll be waiting for you to show up. They'll trap you for sure." Elsa stared. Alice's words, "not Ezekiel," rang in her ears. She snatched the sturdy stick and hauled herself to her feet. Rosie helped her stand. "You have a brother named Ezekiel?" Elsa asked of Nebo as she shook off Glenn's arm. "Two brothers. Judah's older, Ezekiel's younger." He seemed to be deciding what to do, his face creased in a frown, his cheeks hollow. Then he looked at her. "Why?" "Ezekiel Jones wrote to our father about our brother, George, who died and is buried on his property." Nebo made no move towards the horse. "You said your name was Conroy. Not. George's name was Goody." His gaze flicked over the sisters, but his eyes narrowed at Elsa. Nebo," Rosie said, straightening and catching his attention. Elsa briefly closed her eyes. Oh yes, oldest of friends now. "We feared we would have been followed and thought not to let our real names be known," Rosie went on, her forthright stare fixed on him. "We are Rosie and Elsa. Our family name is Goody." Rosie had omitted her married name and had conveniently removed her thin wedding band at some point too. But that was certainly not Elsa's worry now. "I have Ezekiel Jones's letter with me. It's in my satchel," she said. Nebo tilted his head at Fred, who loped to the cart. He retrieved the bag and brought it back to Elsa. She rummaged amongst her underclothes for the envelope and pulled out the letter, holding it out to Nebo. He didn't reach for it. "It's his handwriting. I recognise it." He frowned as if he was about to say something else to her. Instead, he turned back to Glenn. "I'll have to go see Jude." Glenn shook his head. "They'll haul you away. The troopers won't believe it was you, or the rest of us." Nebo thumbed at Elsa and Rosie. "They are witnesses to say it wasn't me." Rosie took a deep breath. "The coach driver thought Elsa and I were the robber's accomplices." She pointed at Elsa. "He said that she'd not be able to hide. Her wild head of hair is unmistakable, and Lord knows," she said, shaking her head, "there's no taming it. Never has been." "Her hair," he barked. "Well, just look at it." All eyes stared at Elsa's head as if she'd grown another one. Trying to tidy her hair, she picked a twig out of it. There was dust there too, and dirt. A leaf. She flicked it clear. Rosie threw her hands in the air. "We were driving along, and suddenly the Cobb & Co. was coming fast behind us without realising we were ahead. When it rounded the bend, poor Pepin took fright, and we ended up halfway across the road." She slapped one hand on her hip and waved the other. "It must have looked as if we'd stopped there deliberately once the Bushrangers came out, and so the coach driver accused us of being
strumpets, and that he'd recognise her anywhere because of her hair.
Fred chortled, but with a glare from Alice he stopped. She then said to Nebo,
"Send her, the young one, to find out about Judah. I can fix her hair so it looks different. If she has a letter from Ezekiel, no one will think different than she's had to see him about her brother. Send her on Tilly's horse, Salty. He's rested."
Rosie gaped.
"That means she'll be on her own."
Elsa was thinking hard as she tucked the letter back into her satchel.
"That's right, alone," Alice said. "There's another way to get to Ezekiel's house, away from the main road. Real easy with good directions. People ain't dangerous around here. She'll be all right."
"How can you say that?" Rosie cried. "You've just told us there's a madman out there who's attacked someone, and Bushrangers held up that coach." Alice blurted a laugh.
"Bushrangers? What cods? If it was that Billy Watson, he couldn't hit his own foot, even if he could see it. His big fat belly would get in his way."
Rosie whipped around and stared at Elsa. "You're not to go. George lost his life here in this lawless country to thugs, to bushrangers. Remember that." Everyone looked away. Clutching the satchel with one arm, her foot throbbing, Elsa shifted her weight. "I do. It's why we're here, isn't it? It's about George, Rosie. About his things," she finished firmly, hoping to convey a message to her frightened sister.
"Do you mean the locket he carried?"
Nebo asked. Elsa turned to Nebo.
"You know of that?"
"Zeke has it,"
he said, his attention lingering on Rosie a moment before returning to Elsa.
"You said things. Was there something else your brother had?"
"How do you know of the locket?" Elsa insisted. "Did you know George to speak with him? Were you anywhere near where he was attacked?"
Nebo sighed. "I found him. Bad injured on Jude's place."
Rosie clapped a hand to her mouth.
"Bad injured how?"
Elsa asked as a fierce burn shot through her chest. Nebo looked as if he was deciding whether to go on. Then he said,
"Shot. I don't know how long he'd been lying there. He didn't know either, but he'd been left for dead."
Elsa felt her tears sting, and a lump bobbed in her throat.
"I picked him up, put him over my horse, grabbed up what was strewn around him and set off for Zeke's. I knew he'd look after him."
At their silence, he continued.
"Zeke had him maybe 3 days. Doc said it was only a matter of time. Nothing could be done."
He took in a deep breath.
"He's buried on Zeke's."
Nodding, Elsa hesitated before saying, "I know. So, I just want to get there, see where George is, and then go." She decided not to ask any more. She couldn't trust her voice. She hoped that wherever the locket was, the tin of coins would not be far away. But the chances of that looked slim. Poor George had probably been murdered for it. Thankfully, Rosie didn't look as if she'd ask any more either. She still had her hand over her mouth. Nebo pointed at Elsa.
"You're going to Zeke's alone on Salty."
He held his finger higher in the air when Rosie protested.
"And Rosie, you're staying. So when your sister returns with news of Jude, you can then decide to do what you will."
He turned to Fred.
"Get what Elsa might need from the cart for a short ride and an overnight stay."
He didn't wait for Rosie to respond before he turned to Alice.
"Get her hair fixed."
Elsa had to repeat the directions back to Nebo. When he was satisfied, Rosie elbowed in and took both her hands.
"I'm worried."
"You're always worried," Elsa said, glancing at Nebo, who'd stepped away, waiting to help her mount Tilly's horse. She whispered to Rosie, "But you're not staying here against your will, are you? You want to stay with him." She saw the flush creep over her sister's cheeks. "I'm sure I'll find this other Mr. Jones, bring back the locket and any other information about George and about Nebo's older brother, and then we can go."
Look, I should come with you.
Elsa looked at her. They won't let you, and you don't really want to. I could tell. Rosie, flustered, tried to explain. Well, because you're much better at this than me. Besides, Elsa said, you're Mr. Jones here is right. Rosie bent towards her, eyes flashing under a quick frown. He's not my Mr. Jones. No point hissing at me. Elsa said, he is right. 2 women in a cart, especially after the hold-up, will just bring attention. 1 woman will definitely attract attention, Rosie said loudly. Not if I'm smart. Elsa smoothed her hand over the pinned-up plait that Alice had fashioned for her and tried to make it feel more comfortable. It was tight, and her scalp hurt, but she'd get used to it. She was glad she didn't have bright red hair like the Bushrangers, or that pale, coppery glow of Tilly's. She put on her hat. Don't worry, he says I'm only 2 hours' ride from Ezekiel Jones, and I've memorised the directions. Elsa, it'll be near dark then. So you need to get going. Nebo cut in. He walked Elsa to the cart and helped her climb aboard. Then he walked Salty over and held the reins as Elsa clambered from the cart into the saddle. It was awkward using her right foot in the stirrup to mount, but she managed, thanks to the patient horse. She settled her skirt and slipped her left foot gingerly into the stirrup. She looked across to the canvas drape. No sound, no sight. There was nothing anyone could do for Sal and Wally except leave them to their grief. Fred and Alice watched her from their own tent, while Glenn and Tilly sat at the campfire. Tilly raised her hand in a wave. You bring my Salty back. He's a good horse, she called. Elsa nodded. I will. Then she looked back at Rosie. When I come back, then we can go, she said. If you want to go, she thought, when Rosie gave her a tentative nod. Elsa already knew, as she was turning Salty's head, that when she did return, she could well be leaving without her sister. This is the end of CD 5. The book continues on CD 6. CD 6. "25. Zeke had reharnessed Mrs. Hartman's horse, Cricket. Once the doc had stitched Jude and declared him wrapped up tight enough to endure a careful cart ride, they got him into the back. They packed him in with his own swag and Mrs. Hartman's gardening sack full of weeds and set off. Zeke wasn't leaving Jude to fare alone in his own house tonight. He feared that bastard Goody might return to finish him off. Gifford rode Milo alongside the cart. Dr. Smith rode with them until the turn-off to the town. He declared he'd go to the police station and report the stabbing, then waved goodbye as he headed down the road. No difference to Zeke that the doc would report to the police. I'll find the bastard before then, that's for sure. What exactly Zeke would do with him, he didn't know. Not until the time came, anyhow. He'd had a couple of hours or so to cool off since watching Jude slip into a deep sleep. The doctor had arrived with a red-faced Gifford who'd been riding hard. Jude did have a deep cut in him, but nothing major had been nicked, the doc said. He'd be sore and tired after all the blood loss. As soon as he got to Jude's, he'd first asked Zeke if the blood had been black, and was very satisfied to learn it was not. But if the wound was kept clean, and the man well-watered, he should be good as gold in no time. 20 good stitches and a swab of medicinal alcohol would do the job nicely. A relief for Zeke, but that didn't mean his rage was any less, just best cold. That way he'd have a clear head when he hunted down Curtis Goody. And now, early evening. They were only a half hour or so out. Dark soon, but enough light to be able to get Jude inside and settled. Would have to be in Zeke's bed, but that would be fine. It was nothing to find another cot or something makeshift and some blankets for himself. He wondered how Mrs. Hartman had managed. He shied away from thinking that Goody might have gone to his house, and there being only a woman and 2 young children defenceless, he couldn't think of that. She might have asked his kids for his rifle, might have decided to keep it ready, or would she have taken the 2 children to her own place? Not likely. They'd have had to walk. No. It would have been a better plan for her to stay put. He hoped that's what she'd done. As the sky darkened over the setting sun and the cart crawled over the undulating terrain, he could see lights twinkling in the distance. His place. And if the lanterns were lit, chances were Mrs. Hartman was still there.
"I'll go ahead, Pa,"
Gif said.
"No,"
Zeke ordered sharply.
"Stay with me."
If something had happened, or if something was wrong, he didn't want Gif in danger too. The lad sucked in a breath and edged Milo closer to the cart.
"Well, could you be all right, Pa?"
he asked quietly.
"I'll be fine, lad,"
Jude wheezed.
"Just damned uncomfortable right at the minute."
"You're awake?" Zeke asked.
"Good. I don't have to lug you inside. You can walk." "I like my chances of that,"
Jude said, a breath rushing out.
"I'll help,"
Gif said.
"We can do it."
About 30 yards out from the house, by Zeke's reckoning, he pulled up the cart. Gif stopped. Cricket stomped and shied, eager to get closer to a feed bucket, no doubt. It was hard to see in the dim light, but what Zeke could see were candles burning in all the windows. He could hear his dogs in the distance, barking in a frenzy. Good sign. If there was no noise from them, he'd be more worried. And the place lit up? He reckoned they were both good signs. Alongside, he could hear Gif breathing fast and Milo whinnied. Jude was snoring, a soft, even rumble, so maybe he was comfortable after all, having fallen quickly into sleep. Nothing was moving at the house, only the flicker of candlelight. He clicked his tongue and flicked the reins lightly. Cricket took it slowly, and Gif nudged Milo forward. Closer, maybe 10 yards from the house, he saw a window swing open, a rifle propped on the sill, and he heard its bolt slide. He froze. The snoring stopped.
"Who's that?"
Lily Hartman demanded. Zeke nearly let out a sob when he saw that Mrs. Hartman had tucked his little kids into their beds. Gracie and Jonty had nodded off, both huddled in Jonty's bed after a bath. He learned that she'd sat inside the main house with his rifle close by. Gracie had found it for her. Until near dark. Then together they'd lit all the lanterns and candles they could find. "I made it a game," Mrs. Hartman said. "I'll replace them for you, and the lantern wicks." He shook his head. "Not necessary. I wanted this place lit up like a beacon." Poor Jude hadn't walked from the cart too well, leaning on Zeke and Gif. Inside, he'd nodded at Lily and given her a weak smile. Once down the short hallway, into Zeke's room and onto the bed, he dropped off into a deep sleep again. In the kitchen, Gif almost slurped down the rabbit stew and potatoes Mrs. Hartman had prepared, but Zeke couldn't find his appetite just yet. He kept getting up from his chair at the little table, going back to watch over his younger 2, then returning to ruffle the hair of his eldest.
"Mrs. Hartman, I can't thank—"
"Stop," she said to him. "You've thanked me enough. They were fine, and we told stories as we made our dinner. They even helped me rinse off some of this mess," she said, holding out an expanse of skirt still stained with remnant blood. "When I get home, it might have to be burned. All of it." Even in the candlelight, Zeke could see his brother's blood in pools and smears all over her clothes.
"We'll replace your clothes. You probably saved his life."
"Then what's a few clothes?" She glanced at Gifford at the table. He was staring at the cooker, one eye drooping, then the other. "Young man, your sister and your brother left the bathwater. In you get." Giff didn't balk. He just nodded, stood up, and began to strip off. Zeke herded him to the bath at the other end of the room, drew over the curtain he'd rigged up when Maisie was still alive. Giff splashed for a bit, complaining about the cold water, soaped up, scrubbed his head, and climbed out. He dried off and, wrapped in the wet towel, silently headed for the house. Zeke followed him to the room the boy shared with his siblings, and Giff fell drowsily onto his cot, folding like a rag doll. Zeke pulled away the towel and draped a blanket over him. The boy was already fast asleep. Emotion welled up. Breathing deeply, he willed his heart to stop its pounding. He rubbed his stinging eyes. He walked out quietly, went to his room and peered inside. Jude was on his good side, snoring again. Zeke wondered where his other brother might be, wondered if he was safe. Too bad. Tonight, Nebo would have to look after himself. Back in the kitchen room, Mrs. Hartman gave him a small smile. She'd settled in a chair by the stove. "I'd rather not travel home tonight, so if you don't mind, I'll stay here, in the kitchen."
Mrs. Hartman, use Gracie's bed. My kids won't surface until dawn, and they can take you home on the way to school tomorrow.
She nodded, relieved. That would be very good. After she'd gone into the main house, Zeke tamped down the stove and pinched the wicks out. Back inside, he retrieved the rifle, unloaded and reloaded it, and took it to his room. Earlier, he'd pulled Jude's swag from the cart and had taken it inside. Unrolling it now, he threw it on the floor near Jude, and after towing off his boots, sank onto it. Tonight, he'd do without a pillow. As he lay back, his thoughts wandered. The horses had been rubbed down, fed, watered, and were sheltered in the stalls. He'd checked the dogs. Their barks deafening. They were fine, and gradually settled. Mrs. Hartman's cart was parked nearby. He'd latched the back and the front doors to his house. Only his window was open and unlatched. If anyone came in the night, that's the window through which he'd shoot them. He closed his eyes. 26. Elsa was fuming. It was getting dark too quickly. Nebo Jones must have misjudged the miles and the time it would take to get to where she was supposed to go. The sun was down now, and the last of its glow was just a faint band of light on the western horizon. Salty was keen to get going, anywhere, but she held him steady. She found the old track's crossroads and knew that she had to keep going straight ahead and not turn towards the town. Was it her imagination, or could she see the glimmer of house lights? If that was the case, she wasn't even a mile from Casterton, on the flats, but she'd been told to keep clear of the town. There'd be low hills, and the Glenelg River to avoid. Nebo Jones had said if she could see the town, she'd only be 2 miles or so from where she needed to be. Veer right just after another crossroad, and that would be his brother's backtrack. Surely there'd be enough light for her to at least make that. She nudged Salty and he lurched into a loping gallop. She let him go for about a mile, then slowed him up. The night was still and light clouds covered the stars. If there was to be a moon of any sort, she hoped she'd have a little light from it. Gracious. If not, she'd have to sleep out in the open by herself. She wasn't too keen on that, but she wouldn't dare press on in the pitch dark of night. Apart from sending the horse into a rabbit hole and laming him, she could end up so lost that she might never be found. Ever. She pulled Salty to a halt. She wouldn't dismount. She couldn't. She'd never get back on again. So she waited until he settled and then kneed him to a walk. She hunkered down over his neck, whispering to him. His warmth, the solid mass of him, his confident step in the deepening night all made her feel safer somehow. Her face was so very close to the only being she could trust right now. He would stay on the road, wouldn't he? She knew horses could see a little in the dark. His hooves barely made a sound on the track. Every other sound seemed to heighten as the night descended, but Salty's soft clip-clop in the dust was barely discernible. It was something she was very glad of when she smelled the faint, acrid odour of a campfire. Oh no! The last thing she wanted was to accidentally come across anyone in the dead of night. What if it was that madman? What if it was those bushrangers? She clung to Salty's neck. Her hands, gripping the reins, twisted in his mane. Her foot was throbbing again, but she was sure it was just because of the pressure of the stirrup. She couldn't even ease her foot out for fear the stirrup would drop away and she wouldn't be able to slip back into it. As a horsewoman, she was a really good farm girl, she thought, and almost laughed at that. The farm. If Rosie was to stay with her bushman Jones, and it wouldn't surprise Elsa, certainly if the way they both looked at the other was anything to go by. How did this thing work between people? Surely if she was to go with this bushman, wouldn't he want the same things that Frank had wanted? So why would Rosie want that? Then again, if Nebo Jones looking at Rosie felt as nice as when Henry Benson had looked at Elsa, why would Rosie not want that? A mystery to ponder another night, Elsa Goody. If Rosie did decide to stay away from Robe, what would it mean for Elsa? Could she go back and claim the farm somehow? She bit her lip. And Ma and Pa were buried there, on the farm, beside their other two sons. It was home. It was family. She should go back. She would go back. The farm was one reason. She didn't know how she'd deal with Frank after Rosie, but there was the other reason for needing to be back in South Australia. She was not going to miss out on the first vote for women in the country. Her eyelids drooped and she shook her head. None of this dozing off business. It was not poor Salty's responsibility to get her to Ezekiel Jones, the letter writer, who looked after dear George. It was hers, and she needed to be sharp. Smoke from the campfire still hung lazily in the night air, the teasing wisps of it bothering her. Was it getting stronger? Was she getting closer to its source? Or had a breeze picked it up and swung the scent towards her? She kept her cheek against Salty's neck, resting on the coarse scrape of his mane, and breathed in the earthy warmth of him. Her hands were still tightly wound in the reins as she patted him with her knuckles. That campfire smoke was definitely stronger. She was hoping Salty would remain quiet and continue to wander at his leisurely pace until... Oh no! She could see the faint glow of the campfire itself. Oh no! Oh no! Elsa held her breath, hugged the horse with hands and elbows and knees, hunkered lower on him, and prayed he wouldn't nick her into the quiet night. No moon, no moon. She whispered to Salty, "Stay calm, boy. Calm." But she was ready to kick him into a gallop if necessary. Squeezing her eyes tight, willing the silence, willing stealth, they crept along. After a time, her body aching, tense and cramping, she took a furtive peek. The firelight glow was behind them. Her breath still came in shallow puffs, her grip easing a little on the reins. Salty swaggered along with a rhythmic gait, still calm, still silent. She kept him walking like that for the longest time. She couldn't tell how long, until she realized that the smoke of the campfire was no longer floating about her. Had they veered off where they were supposed to? She didn't know. Right now, she didn't care. In the morning, she could backtrack if she had to. Things always look better in the morning. The air was cool, and the night scents and sounds seemed to have altered. Gone was the dry and peppery waft of scrublands, and the gentle whisper of the bullocks, the casuarina in the breeze. The air was fresher now, as if skimming over open land. She looked up, arms sore, her hands still clasped to Salty's mane. She couldn't see anything. No stars lit the sky. Tiny cold sprinkles fell on her face. A light mist was falling. Was it an hour gone? Was it 2? She tried to sit up straight, but every muscle creaked and groaned. Everything gave her pain. She needed to stretch and ease out the stiffness. And there, out of the dark night, a box-like shadow loomed ahead, a darker pitch against the wide night sky. A house! Salty whinnied. Elsa froze. 27. Zeke woke. He didn't know why. First thing, he smelled moisture in the air, the scent of rain on dry earth. From the swag, he glanced up through the window at the night sky, black as pitch, so maybe cloud had rolled in and falling rain had woken him. He waited. No rain, no fat drops landing on the roof. A horse whinnied. Milo? Cricket? But they were at the back. Christ almighty. He edged off the thin bedding and crawled to the window to peer out. At first, he saw nothing. Then a silhouette. A sturdy beast and a rider, motionless. Why hadn't the dogs barked? Christ, Christ, Christ. He sunk back to the floor, felt for the rifle, his hand on the butt. Yes, he could shoot out the window if need be. But who was out there? The front door? No, take the back door and go around the house to the front. On the dirt, not on the veranda. No noise, no noise. He snatched up the rifle, then thought better of it. What use would it be if he couldn't see a damn thing? Still, he took it with him as he left the room, Jude's deep breathing the only sound. The door to his kids' room was closed over as he passed, so he heard nothing from there. He walked swiftly, lightly in socked feet, and slid the bolt on the back door. The latch scraped when he released it, and the sound boomed in his ears. He held his breath. No hooves, no footfalls, no dogs barking. Probably good. He'd take this bastard by surprise. Damn it! Would the door creak as it opened? He couldn't remember if it did. Why couldn't he bloody remember if his own back door creaked when it opened? Jesus! He pulled it an inch, 2 inches, a foot, a little more so he could squeeze through, the rifle snug at his side. Crouching, he edged towards the back of the house, feeling his way along the wall, its weatherboards familiar under his hand. At the corner, he stood, daring to move only enough to see across the yard where the horse and rider stood. What was he doing, this trespasser? Just standing there? Zeke's pulse thudded in his neck. If he moved, chances were he'd be seen. He stared, willing the shadow take a form he could... Horse and rider turned away. They were moving carefully, stealthily, towards the other end of the house. If Zeke moved now, he'd be behind them. He lay the rifle flat on the ground, took a deep lungful of night air, then silently sprinted towards them. 28. Elsa couldn't work out what to do. Was this the right house? The house of Mr. Ezekiel Jones, or had she stumbled across someone else's house? Should she keep going or just bang on the door, and perhaps risk life and limb? Either way, there looked to be not a soul about. There were no sounds of chatter or laughter, no candles burned in any windows that she could see. And why would there be? Surely any sane folk would be in the land of Nod now. A flutter scampered in her belly, and once again her hands tingled. But Salty didn't seem to be worried, certainly not by her indecisiveness. What fool's errand was this? She should have smartly told that Nebo Jones that she'd make her way here by the light of day, and not gallivant around country, unfamiliar to her, in the dead of night. The truth of the matter was that her fear had made her tardy, otherwise she'd have been here in daylight. Instructions on how to get to where she needed to be were clear and concise. Even Alice had agreed with that. It was Elsa's own trepidation. Oh, and the threat of some likely murderer who was minding his own business at his campfire that led her to be cowering in the dark. For all she knew, she could be in Timbuktu, though she never really learned where that was. Maybe she should if she survived the night. Salty stood patiently. The house loomed in the dark, almost as some sort of sentinel that she could only catch in full if she turned her gaze away a little. It wasn't that big when she could make sense of its shape. Well, she couldn't stay out here all night, perched on top of her horse and feeling slightly ridiculous, or increasingly scared. Not to mention the fact that the heavens might open and she'd get a good drenching. Best to let Salty wander further on in his quiet way and together find somewhere safe and under cover. She tugged the reins and the horse moved off to the right. Elsa bent low on him again, feeling more secure closer to his solid neck than sitting bolt upright. He seemed such an obliging horse. An iron grip wrenched her from her seat and flung her from the saddle. She landed hard, sprawled, her hands skidding on the ground. Her sore foot bounced and her cry erupted. Salty reared half-heartedly. His hooves came down not far from her face, which was pressed into the dirt as hard hands dug into her back. They shook her. The horse sidestepped, huffed, and trotted away.
"What are you doing outside my place in the dead of night?"
The man's voice, irate and low, grated out between clenched teeth. Hands bunched in her dress, hard knuckles jammed between her shoulder blades. He kept up the pressure on her back, forcing her to stay down. The grip on her bodice restricted her breathing, and as she panted, she tasted dirt and leaves, and strangely hoped she wouldn't swallow ants or anything. Dogs barked in a frenzy somewhere. Panicked, she tried to wrestle, but he had her pinned tight and... Oh, dear God, was that his knee on her back? He was roughly patting down her leg.
"I said, what are you doing?" "Jesus. A dress. You're a woman."
She was let go. A thrust as if he'd suddenly been burned. The knee came off her, and he sprang back. She dared not move. Not yet.
"Can you get up?"
His voice was gruff, but gentler. "I'm looking for Ezekiel Jones." She puffed in a rush into the dirt and tried not to inhale any. Then she pushed herself onto her backside and dusted off her hands. The scrape stung. Her foot had burst with pain, but she dared not do anything about that just yet. She panted some more times to catch her breath before she'd lash out with fists and scratch with fingernails and...
"I thought you might have been a man who's been seen in the area."
He squatted beside her, his voice low again, but not furious. Just a whisper, an apology of sorts.
"A dangerous man."
"Clearly, I'm not he. Are you Ezekiel Jones?" Dogs barked incessantly.
"I am. Just a moment."
He turned and yelled,
"Itch! Scratch! Busy! Quiet!"
One last yap, then instant peace. The rest of the household hadn't stirred. "Well, good," Elsa said, tetchy. "I was looking for you, and I would have come here in daylight, except I messed up my timing somehow." She could hear herself, indignant, uppity, and scared. She'd been scared, she admitted it. This was not the kind man she'd felt he would be. "I didn't expect to get sat on." He stood.
"Why were you looking for me?"
His legs were mere inches from her. She struggled to get up, couldn't manage it from where she was, and longed to grab hold of those legs and haul herself upright. He must have been able to see a little.
"You're hurt. I'm sorry for that. Let me help you. Take my hand."
Her eyes were adjusting too, and she saw his hand in front of her. She was still scared. "Don't touch me," she snapped. She turned over onto her hands and knees and pushed up on one leg, hopping perilously, but she managed it. A solid rod of iron bumped her, and she realized his arm had shot out. She grabbed it, and he steadied her.
"Don't let go if you intend to come in for the night. You'll break your neck in this dark."
"I need something from the horse."
"First, I'm going to take you to the veranda and sit you down. Then I'll get you inside. I'll get your horse. What's his name?"
"Salty."
Salty?
He clamped his arm to his side, pulling her to him.
You come from Nebo's camp. That's Tilly's horse.
Yes, yes, she said impatiently, and even to her own ears it sounded as if she'd whimpered as well. It's a long story, but my sister and I were set upon by bushrangers at a hold-up.
Bloody Nebo.
It was barely audible. And she's still at your brother's camp. Tilly was there and loaned me her horse to find you. She limped along, his forearm hard and warm under her hand. The silence from him felt tight in the night air, and only a few shuffles later he stopped as she heard a soft thump, perhaps his shin on something. A grunted expletive, then a hissed intake of breath.
I've found the veranda,
he muttered, his tone wry. He helped her turn.
Now, there's much more to this story, so you'll tell me all about it.
She groped her way down and sat heavily. Out of the corner of her eye she saw a flicker, then the glow of candlelight appeared in the window.
Zeke?
A male voice called softly. A tired face appeared, strangely familiar.
Hi, Jude. It's me.
As Ezekiel padded up to his brother, Jude handed a lantern out the window for him to take. As the light swung, Ezekiel's face was also familiar, quite the strong resemblance between the three brothers. Nebo Jones was nothing to write home to Mama about, so to speak, and the older brother looked very much older, handsome in a craggy sort of way. But this brother, this Ezekiel, Zeke. Elsa felt her mouth dry. His face was...
Seems we have a late-night visitor,
Ezekiel told him.
Go back to bed.
The face still peered out, eye squinting.
You're all right. I'm all right.
There was a silence, and Elsa glanced up. Ezekiel Jones's intense gaze was on her, and her breath caught.
I think,
she thought he said, and his dark eyes were gleaming in the lantern light. It was awkward. She'd had to lean on him and try to shuffle, hop quietly alongside the veranda as they made their way to the back door. Inside, she was directed to what might once have been a parlour room of some sort. Barely used, she noted once he'd set down the lantern. He lit another, and the room appeared to be used as a store. But in it was a narrow cot by the far wall, and he bid her sit on it. Then he left. She could hear him murmur to someone down the passage, and when he returned he brought a pitcher of water and a bowl. He set them down on a small table after swiping a stack of old newspapers from it. Turning to look for something, he found it in the corner and pulled a sheet off a piece of furniture. It revealed a commode chair, its chamber pot underneath. Satisfied, he dragged it closer to the cot and left it there. With a foot, he pushed a latched timber trunk into the middle of the room and sat on it, facing her. His feet were clad only in socks. No surprise they were filthy from the bid to run her down. His trousers were tied with a leather belt around his waist and his plain shirt was crumpled. Tufts of dark hair sprouted through the unbuttoned neck. Elsa was sure she had her mouth open. Certainly her breath was coming a little faster. She couldn't seem to get enough air. But his face... there was the kindness which she believed was in him. His eyes were dark, and a slight frown was a constant over them. His nose had a bump in it. Perhaps it had been broken. The set of his mouth was easy, as if he was comfortable. His upper lip, under a shadow of stubble, his lower lip over a glint of what might have been 2-day-old silver whiskers. There wasn't a hint of a smile. But he wasn't angry either. He eyed her.
Though the hour is not conducive, a little chit-chat might not be amiss. You already know who I am. You must introduce yourself.
He rested his forearms on his thighs, lacing his large and gnarled fingers. Farmer's hands, well used to tightening leather, straining wire on fence posts, hammering horseshoes. There'd been broken bones. One finger had healed bent. The shape of his hands was familiar to her by way of their work. Oh, yes, she said and nodded, distracted as she'd been by other things. I'm Elsa Goody. My sister's Rosie. You wrote to our father Curtis Goody about the death of our brother George. You've buried George on your property. His brows furrowed, and this time he didn't appear comfortable.
You're Curtis Goody's daughter.
She really did not like the sudden dark look that crossed his face. He doesn't believe me. Yes. And when you're able to get salty and find my satchel, the letter you sent us is in there. It'll prove who I am. He thrust off the trunk and stood over her so suddenly Elsa reared back on the cot. Her feet scuffed the floorboards as she tried to keep some distance. She winced as her sore foot protested. He thrust a thumb over his shoulder.
I've met a man who calls himself Curtis Goody, and George's father,
he said, his teeth clenched.
He attacked Jude, my brother, a day ago, stabbed him, left him in a pool of blood. What are you up to?
Baffled, shocked, Elsa cried, My pa is dead, Mr. Jones. Dead a day after we received your letter about George, barely a week ago. What are you talking about? Pressing herself against the wall, wary and her pulse thudding in her throat, she stared as Ezekiel Jones blinked back his fury. Which one of us is mad? My satchel! Get my satchel, it's got your letter.
When I find that man again,
Mr. Jones muttered to her,
he'll wish he was dead.
He spun around, grabbed a lantern, and stormed out of the room. Next, she heard his footfalls on the veranda, and a long, throaty whistle followed. A horse whinnied, and she heard more of Ezekiel's murmurs. The dogs had begun to bark again, but another whistle, sharp this time, silenced them. She thought she'd heard children cry out, and then a woman's soothing voice calming them. She waited, straining to hear something more. It seemed like ages had passed before hurried footfalls sounded on the veranda. Then he was back in the room, her satchel in his hands. He set down the lantern, then held out the bag for her. She grabbed it, frowning and indignant. Just to set him straight, she said, I don't know who you think you've met, but it is most definitely not my father. This time it was her jaw that clenched. She was so angry. She couldn't stop the tears forming. Trembling. She dashed them as they fell, and they stopped. Her father was dead. How could Ezekiel Jones possibly think that he'd seen her father here, in this district? She rummaged in the satchel and snatched out his letter, threw it at him. He caught it, checked it, pulled the single-page letter from the envelope and bent closer to the lantern. Elsa could easily see that he recognized what it was. She watched his features crease, shaken, bewildered. When he looked up, his eyes were fiery under twisted brows.
I took him to your brother's grave,
he said, apologetic, perhaps horrified that he'd made such an error of judgment.
He lies by a great eucalypt on my land, a place of peace and comfort, and he faces the colony of his birth.
His written words now played across Elsa's mind in the compassionate tone she could hear in him. The letter, and his voice just now, was not that of a cold-hearted man. They were of someone who had known sorrow and grief, who'd known the importance of comfort in dark times. She'd felt it when she first read his letter, when she first realized how deeply his prose had touched her, how kind she'd thought at the time. She remembered it clearly. Then he looked to the ceiling and spoke, relief in his voice.
I did not give him your brother's belongings.
I'm grateful for that, she said softly. She held out her hand for the letter. Will you take me to my brother's grave in the morning?
I will.
He tucked the page into the envelope and handed it back to her.
I have the packet containing the locket. If you'll allow, I'll bring it to you now.
Elsa nodded. She thought it strange that he still had it with him. After meeting a person he'd believed to be George's father, he must have had his suspicions. but she was happy and relieved that it would be returned to her and Rosie. As she huddled on the cot, his look at her lingered a moment before he left the room. She laced her shaking fingers and she waited. Lantern light barely flickered in the still night as she listened to the stirrings of the house. A snore from somewhere, a cry that sounded as if it came from a child's dream. Soft footfalls on the boards. She breathed in its scents. Furniture polish, perhaps a lemon fragrance? Musty paper, dust. It wasn't a new house, but it was sturdily built, she could tell. The timber floors were older and shot-edged, the planks butted together, but the walls were more recent tongue and groove, as if the place had been refurbished. The planks were most definitely milled, and pine probably. How lovely. A proper house. She'd seen others like it at home in Robe. She wondered if he worked at a sawmill, or was this a farmhouse and he ran sheep? Perhaps he grew crops. She couldn't tell in the dark of the night, but as lanolin and urea odours were very faint, she guessed he was more a crop farmer. Ezekiel appeared at the door, his face blank, a packet wrapped in newspaper in his big hands.
This is what my brother gave me of George's.
It looked very small, but recognizing it, she knew that inside was a memory that could never be replaced, that was more precious than anything else she had ever held in her hands. He placed the parcel gently in her outstretched hand. Unwrapping it, she nodded. It was all she could do in response as she drew it to her chest. Her throat closed with emotion so strong she couldn't speak, and a sob almost tore from her. She held on, her stomach tight, fearful she would crack and not recover. Composing herself, she glanced up through unshed tears. He'd been watching her, and now looked around as if undecided what to do next. He bent to the trunk, unlatched it, and drew out a beautiful quilt, faintly fragrant with herbs and some sort of spice. He dropped it onto the cot.
I have no spare pillow,
he said. He looked fierce about that. No matter, she said, and it wasn't.
I'll put Salty in the stable with the other horses.
Then he said,
Remember, there's a madman out there, and this is the safest place for you to be. So don't think about leaving in the night.
Elsa blinked, sniffed. She straightened up, the envelope still held tight. I'd hardly get very far, would I? I've a broken bone in my foot. Her foot throbbed as if agreeing with her. His features softened.
Someone will help you with your foot in the morning. And, again,
he indicated his letter.
My condolences about your father. Good night, Miss Goody.
And with that, he turned, his feet whispering over the floorboards as he left the room. Good night, she called to his back. And thank you, Mr. Jones. He might not have heard her. She let out a long breath, and still clutching the packet, gathered the quilt around her as best she could and tucked in her feet. She lay down and opened the newspaper parcel, angling it towards the light. In it was a stiff envelope, folded and clasped with a piece of twine hooked loosely over a daub of cracked sealing wax. It had been opened. She unwound the twine and shook out 3 buttons, nondescript little wooden ones that George might have made himself, and clearly something he thought he might have needed. Perhaps Pa had drilled it into him to keep up appearances should his shirt be missing buttons. She couldn't really imagine that, though. She turned one of them over. Something was scratched in it. The letter R. She turned over another, and it had the letter G on it. The third had E on it. They were his and his sister's initials. George. A sentimental wanderer. Her heart filled, and a sob escaped this time. Next, she withdrew the handkerchief that was wrapped around the locket. As far as she could tell, it was clean. Thank you, George. Perhaps he'd kept it so for securing his mother's likeness. She felt for the tiny clasp and opened the piece. Inside was the sealed but unmistakable lock of her hair and the picture of her mother Kitty, unsmiling, gazing serenely in profile. A peace descended on Elsa. No tears, no lump in her throat. She gazed at her mother's likeness and let long-forgotten memories race and tumble over her. She touched the tiny glass under which was the curl of shiny dark brown hair, then carefully closed the locket. She kissed it, and clutching it to her cheek, remained still for long moments. Sighing, she tucked the locket back into the packet. She lay awake, the reminiscences receding. Then she leaned over, blew out the lantern light, and snuggled down. Drowsy, she wondered who'd made the quilt, and who'd stored it so lovingly with rosemary and lavender and another spicy scent she couldn't identify. Restless throughout the night, whenever she rolled over, the scent of it brought the picture of Ezekiel Jones's face, when he'd stared at her under the lantern light by his brother's window. Zeke lay down on the swag again, reached over, lifted the lantern glass, and blew out the wick. Darkness engulfed him. He'd had to leave the spare room quickly. He was feeling things that had been long gone, that were now unfamiliar. It made him uncertain. Elsa Goody smelled of horse, musky, grassy, of leather and dust, and beneath that, her own scent, an ambrosia sweet on her skin, and elusive. He took a deep breath, trying to capture the memory. She'd felt all woman when his hands had slid down her legs seeking a hidden weapon. There was no gun. The weapon had been the surprise of her. He bet her smile would be as wide as sunshine, if he ever saw her smile. And those eyes of hers, staring at him, at first fearful, he couldn't blame her for that, then angry and wide, challenging everything he said. Being the boy's sister, she'd have to learn everything they could relate to her. He'd given her the packet of his belongings. He'd take her to his grave as soon as he could. She'd have to meet Jude. Damn, there was Mrs. Hartman to look after. The kids would help. Maybe he should keep them away from school because of this imposter Curtis Goody on the loose. Who knew what the man would try? He turned on his side, away from Jude's soft rumbles. His brother seemed comfortable and out of danger from the knife wound. But his thoughts wouldn't let him sleep. There was a woman on his mind. A woman with a forthright stare, a proud stance despite a broken foot, and a clear and bright confidence in her speech. A capable woman. A woman with a supple, strong body, younger than he, but not immature. A woman to whom he'd responded, on a deeper level than just the obvious, to him at least, and one who looked as if she'd felt it too. Oh, sure, his cock was responding, and thank Christ it was. Meant he wasn't dead to the pleasures of the world. But he was too tired, and that could wait. He rolled on his back again, closed his eyes, and slept. 29. Elsa could feel the flutter on her lashes. What was that? She was asleep, wasn't she? And yet, it was a breath. It was someone or something was breathing, steady and low, close to her face. No light had crept under her eyelids. No sound had pricked her ears. Frozen in place, not daring to move, she desperately tried to remember where she was. Rosemary. Lavender. Oh, yes. Ezekiel Jones's house. She made a noise. If it was some animal, a dog perhaps, staring down at her, maybe it would scurry away.
"Oh, good," a child's voice said. "Pa said not to wake you, but I brung you some tea."
It was a lispy whisper.
"I didn't wake you, did I? I get in trouble 'cause I'm not allowed to be in here."
A child's voice. Elsa cranked open one eye and found she was face to face with a young boy, whose big, brown eyes were studying her. He had a tin cup in one hand. Steam was rising from it.
"No, you didn't wake me,"
she said, her whisper as quiet as his. The moment her eyes had opened, her foot began to throb.
"Then you better hurry up and drink the tea. I have to go to school."
He stayed close, reached out, and stroked her cheek with his other hand.
"You're real."
"I am real," she said, and struggled to sit up, tangled as she was in the quilt.
"Will you be here when we come back from school?"
he asked, still very close to her face. There was no mistaking whose child this was. He was Ezekiel Jones's son. That was very clear. The boy was as alike to his father as peas in a pod, right down to the line of his jaw, the colour of his eyes, even the tilt of his head. The resemblance was strong to Nebo Jones as well, but there was no mistaking whose child he was. But there was another dimension there, not all Ezekiel. The boy's mother would have made her mark on him, possibly the deep dimple in one cheek. The boy's mother. The female voice she'd heard murmur last night. No doubt Elsa would meet her soon. So better be quick to put those stupid thoughts from last night out of your stupid head. She squeezed her scratchy, dry eyes shut and open again. Barely made any difference.
"Will you be here?"
he repeated, insistent. Elsa couldn't see herself leaving today. "Today I should be here. Tomorrow I might have to go."
"What's your name?"
he still whispered, and thrust the cup at her. "Elsa," she said, and took the cup before the contents landed in her lap. "What's yours?" Nose to her nose.
"Jonty,"
he said. "Pleased to meet you, Jonty." An older woman peeked around the open door. "There you are, Jonty Jones. Did you wake the lady?" "He didn't wake me," Elsa said in a rush. "Goodness, Mr. Jones's wife looks much older than I expected." She put down the tea and swung her legs off the cot. Her throbbing foot didn't let up. "Come along, young man," the woman said. "We'll get you something to eat before school." Jonty scuttled out.
"Bye, Elsa."
The woman stood in the doorway. Her dress was splotched at the hem, as if she stood in a puddle, and there were dark smudges on the bodice. She smiled, and her face creased into soft lines and deep wrinkles at her eyes that suggested to Elsa perhaps this woman might have been Jonty's grandmother and not his mother. She glanced down at Elsa's bandaged foot. When Elsa looked at it, she was dismayed to see how dirty it had become. "Oh, gracious, that looks awful." "The children are having their breakfast, so I've come to take you to the privy and to help you bathe and dress." "Thank you, Mrs. Jones," Elsa said automatically. May as well get that over and done with. She felt her face warm despite her best intentions. "Oh, my dear, my name is Lily Hartman." "Mrs. Hartman. I was also a guest of the Joneses last night. It seems we have a house full of people, 3 of whom don't usually reside here." "Not Jonty's mother." "And for your information, both Messrs. Jones are Yells and shouts, erupting in an argument, were coming from another room. They were children's voices. A deep grumble from a man followed, and the shouts quietened to indignant protests of who was to blame for what. Another deep rumble, and there was silence, followed by the stomping of feet as someone left the house. For a long moment, it had all been music to Elsa's ears. "Are you feeling quite all right?" Mrs. Hartman asked. "Yes, I am. I was just listening to sounds I haven't heard for a very long time. She put her good foot on the floor. I'm Elsa Goody. I'd come looking for Mr. Jones but got lost in the night. Well, clearly you found him, and it's certainly all very intriguing. Not to mention nasty, I imagine, Mrs. Hartman said, pointing at Elsa's foot. Can you walk at all on that? A bone is broken, I think. I can hop and shuffle. And I had a stick somewhere that helped me. I'll see if someone can fashion a set of crutches for you. Shouldn't be difficult for the strapping farm men around here, or at least the healthy one, that is. Come along, let's get you moving. No sense using that thing if you don't have to. She tilted her head at the commode chair. On Mrs. Hartman's arm, Elsa managed to hobble out of the room, past 2 other rooms along a short hallway, and outside to the privy. Afterwards she hopped and limped to the cookhouse, and Mrs. Hartman sat her in a chair. The children appeared to have gone, and the silence was pronounced. At the stove, slicing a chunk of fresh damper from the fragrant loaf, Mrs. Hartman said, Mr. Jones has taken his children to the gate on their way to school. There'll be time for you to have a quick bath, she said, and pointed to a drawn curtain at the end of the room, and to wash some of the dust and dirt off you. She pushed the plate with damper and jam on it to Elsa. Put something in your stomach first, dear. I really must speak to Mr. Jones, Elsa started, tearing off a piece of damper and dabbing it into the jam, a dark, fragrant berry of some sort. He'll be back shortly. She smoothed her hands over her already neat hair, tied back into a sensible bun. I was to go home myself this morning, escorted by the children, but your arrival last night seems to have changed the plans. What do you mean? Another bite was halfway to Elsa's mouth. Mr. Jones, Ezekiel that is, says it mightn't be safe for me to return home just yet, and now with you here, I'm to be a companion for you, and you for me, I suspect. There is another Mr. Jones here, recuperating, you see. Elsa took the mouthful, chewed and swallowed as Mrs. Hartman brought another cup filled with hot tea. Mr. Judah Jones. That's right. Mrs. Hartman smartly turned away, gathering used dishes to take to the deep wash bowl on the bench. Elsa stared down at the woman's dress. Is that blood all over your hem? Judah's blood. I found him early yesterday after the man had attacked him. She put a hand on the small of her back, stretched, and a breathy groan escaped. Oh. Elsa stared at Mrs. Hartman's ramrod straight back. That's terrible for you. Are you all right? I'm a bit creaky today. I had a long gallop bareback yesterday, coming for Ezekiel's help. Out of practice. Mrs. Hartman turned and smiled at her. More terrible for poor Judah, but he's well enough, considering. Now, if you've finished that mouthful, let's get you into the bath. There's a towel for you on the chair. And then I must get on to some chores around here if I'm to be useful. Elsa slid carefully into the shallow bath, but not before Mrs. Hartman had insisted she divest herself of everything, her dress, her chemise and her smalls. At first Elsa protested, not only because she'd be naked, but she'd have nothing to wear afterwards. She had smalls in the satchel. It's just that her chemise was in a very sad state, patched and stitched together, an embarrassment. But who'd have thought it would ever be seen by anyone else? Mrs. Hartman held it up. I'm not sure this would survive a good washing, but we'll have to try. In this weather, it'll dry in a jiffy. I'll sponge off your dress, Miss Goody, and that will have to do. From behind the curtain, Elsa soaped up quickly in the bath. Please don't go to too much trouble, Mrs. Hartman. I'll be gone from here as soon as I have the information. She stopped. Information for Nebo was one thing. Information about George was another. Information? About my brother George, she finished. Well, you'll need decent clothes to gather that information, and I won't be... Wild yells erupted once again, and barking dogs joined the cacophony as Elsa heard the door open. Dogs! Get out of it! A loud male voice commanded,
"And you boys, go tie them up. Calm yourselves. Stop needling Gracie. Mrs. Hartman, I had a sudden feeling that I should like my children home today after all. So here we are back again, right or wrong. You'll have an army to help you with the chores."
The groans of protest from his children made Elsa smile. "Out of the kitchen, children! Out, out, out!" Mrs. Hartman made shooing noises. "And you too, Mr. Jones." After a moment of silence, she said, "Miss Goody is taking a bath."
"Oh, right,"
Mr. Jones said. Elsa heard all the voices fade, and the door shut, and she slid deeper into the bath. She pulled at the tough leather ties and the pins that bound the taut plait and released her hair. Oh, the relief! Scrubbing her fingers on her scalp, the tension eased. Her hair had always been a pain, always a bother. She finger-combed it before dunking her head, washing it with the soap Mrs. Hartman had provided, and rinsing sudsy water with fresh from a pitcher within reach. She squeezed out excess water. Hauling herself out of the bath to the chair, she finished off with the towel. Her hair would take ages to dry. Nothing to do about that but wait. Now, there was only one problem. The satchel carrying her clean smalls was in the room in which she'd slept, and no Mrs. Hartman in sight. She'd just have to wait behind the curtain, while wrapped in the light, damp towel. 30. As Lily stood outside the kitchen room, her arms draped with Elsa's clothes, she listened to Ezekiel explain, his hat in his hand. He certainly had a nice way about him, and had a twinkle in his eye, unlike Sirius Judah. The other brother, Nebo, well, he just seemed to have a chip on his shoulder, always seemed a bit surly. Ezekiel's voice was low and calm.
"I got nearly to the gate, and then I began to worry that if that fellow with the knife was still around, my kids might be in danger. So I turned poor Milo around and came back. Would you stay another day or two longer than I asked? Of course, not to alarm you, but it might be for your own safety as well."
A little disappointed, Lily resisted looking down at her own dirty clothes. "I was hoping to get some fresh clothes, but if you think it best—"
"I'll accompany you to your place for whatever you might need. Jude can look after things for a couple of hours, and Miss Goody is here too. I'm sure she might stay until at least you can get something to—"
He faltered and waved a hand vaguely at her blood-stained clothes. "Oh, yes, a relief to get clean clothes, and something for Miss Goody as well." She paused and looked at him. "I've left her in the cookhouse, so no one is to go there until I say so." He raised his eyebrows, but only said,
"Understood."
"And Mr. Jones will need his bandage changed."
"I can do that."
Lily nodded. "I'll need to wash the old one. And now, where is your copper for laundry, Mr. Jones?" She held up Elsa's dress. He ruffled his hair and replaced his hat.
"Nothing so grand here, Mrs. Hartman. I just boil water on the stove, and it all gets done in the bathtub when I can get to it."
He turned to go.
"I'd prefer to get you to your place and back again as soon as I can."
Lily looked at the chemise and the dress over her arm. "In that case, I'll have to tend to this straight away."
"I'll get Gracie. Direct her for anything you want done. If you're ready now, I'll saddle up our horses."
He shouted for his daughter.
"Gracie, Mrs. Hartman needs your help here."
He's very insistent. Lily walked back to the kitchen. "Are you decent, dear?" she called to Elsa behind the curtain. "We need to do this laundry in here, apparently. Goodness knows why the man hasn't built a lean-to for a copper. 3 children to deal with, and he washes in the bathtub." "I'm wrapped in the towel, Mrs. Hartman." Oh, so lovely to be looking after a young woman again. I do miss Loretta. Lily drew aside the curtain and took in Elsa's wild mass of drying hair, the swollen and bruised foot, and the thin, damp towel. "If you will, sponge off your dress here, then slip it on for the day. We'll get to your chemise now, once I have the water heated. I have clean smalls in the satchel in the room I slept in if someone would... Hello, Mrs. Hartman. At the young voice, Lily turned. Ah, Gracie, would you go to the room Miss Goody slept in and bring her satchel? Gracie was staring at Elsa. Good morning, Miss Goody, she said, her dark eyes clear and bright. I'm pleased to meet you. Good morning, Gracie. I'm pleased to meet you too. Go along now, Mrs. Hartman said to the girl, and hurry back. And a house full of children to look after. Oh, my poor heart has missed this. Gracie turned her gaze to Lily and nodded before leaving, a small smile on her usually solemn face. Lily found a clean rag from the drawer in the hutch and shook it before dunking it in a bowl of water, squeezing out a little moisture and handing it to Elsa. Just the immediate needs, and I'll empty the bath and refill it to wash your chemise. I wish I could help. Not used to being an invalid. Without fault, dear, Mrs. Hartman said, pointing at it. I don't think you'll be doing too much on it for a couple of days at least. Even with crutches, you'll have to rest it. I'll rebandage it shortly. She heaved a pot, heavy with water, onto the stove and stoked the oven beneath, deciding that the chemise could be washed here, not in the bathtub. Before she and Ezekiel got on their way to her place, she would ask Gracie to empty the bath. Such a delight to be useful again, to have a family to... Thoughts of Judah Jones, and that they'd both been under the very same roof last evening, invaded her mind and crowded other sensible thoughts into a corner. Now, Lily Hartman, she shook herself. Just put a stop to that before you lose your mind, silly woman. She dunked Elsa's thin and patched garment in the lukewarm water and, sudsing with the soap Elsa had used, she tried to start a conversation. I have a daughter about your age, she said. I'm 24, Elsa offered. That surprised Lily. Oh, in that case, my Loretta is younger, and is my youngest. She's 19. She's working in Melbourne City for well-to-do folk. She should be married too soon, I think. The young woman nodded, sponging at the armpits of her dress. So, Miss Elsa is clearly not a talker, Lily decided. No matter, she went on. And I have 2 sons. Oliver, he's the eldest, and Edward, he's the middle child. They're also working in the city. The young woman looked up. Your sons don't live here? Gracious, no. They're in Melbourne too, Lily replied, but felt the little thud in her chest as the emotion of missing them, all 3 of her children, swept through her. They have an education to get. Education, Elsa repeated softly, her head bent over her dress. They're doing well by all accounts, which I might add, are few and far between. Still, you can't expect sons to keep their mothers informed of what they're doing. Or a daughter. I should think it only a kindness, Elsa said, if not a duty. Lily felt colour rise in her cheeks. They do their best, I'm sure, she said, and even to her ears it sounded like an excuse. They mustn't realise what it's like to lose their parents, and how they'd miss them if... Lily heard the young woman's voice waver. They lost their father some years ago, but none of my children are sentimental in that way, she said, and suddenly believed the truth of it. It's not sentimental. Elsa's voice was very quiet. Lily rinsed the chemise one last time and wrung it out as best she could. I'll be right back. Stepping outside with the wet chemise and towel over her arm, she saw Gracie returning with the satchel held tight in her skinny little arms. Here, my dear, I'll take the bag. Would you hang these out in the sunniest place? And make sure they can't fall into the dirt. Yes, Mrs. Hartman. Gracie handed over the satchel and took the wet laundry. Ezekiel came out of the house with a handful of bandages. From what Lily could see, they were only slightly soiled on the spot where Judah's wound would have been. He was heading for the cookhouse. Lily stepped in his path. I'll have that, Mr. Jones. she said, taking the pile of cotton gauze from his hands and slapping it on top of Elsa's bag. "I won't be long, and then we can go." Ezekiel shook his head.
"Mrs. Hartman,
"Just a little more time." She turned with her arms full and marched back into the kitchen. From the satchel, Elsa pulled out a pair of knickers, creased and dusty, and shook them, then reached in and brought forth a camisole in the same condition. "These will do perfectly well under my day dress, Mrs. Hartman," she said. "We can reuse your bandage for your foot, but I will have to wash Mr. Jones's." She stood for a moment. "I wonder if there's more of his things to wash." She turned to Elsa. "Are you all right to dress yourself, dear?" "Yes, there are only a few buttons on my dress. I can manage it." "Good, I must go to Mr. Jones. Mr. Judah, that is. Oh, it feels so good to have such purpose." She walked smartly back to the house. Mr. Ezekiel is waiting patiently, the dear man. And once returned from getting fresh clothes for myself, I can set to and bake for this family. Goodness knows, there's hardly anything here for all of us to eat. I can gather eggs from home, and the last of my bake from the other day. She found herself at the door of the room which Judah occupied. Her heart leapt. Surely that was a good sign. The warm thrills cascading in her belly. She knocked, heard him invite her in with a curt, "Yes." So in she went, her breath in her throat. Standing in the open doorway, she said, "Mr. Jones, I'm so glad to see you well." Though he did look a bit pasty, she clasped her hands in front of her to prevent them fluttering to her hair. He wore no shirt, and a thin spread of dark hair, sprinkled with silver, spread across his chest and trailed down to where it met a thick swathe of bandage, wrapped low and firmly around his hips.
"Well as can be, Mrs. Hartman."
Gruff, of course. Of course he was. He was Judah Jones.
"All thanks to you getting to my brother in a hurry."
He glanced at her, then looked away. The stubble on his cheeks and jaw was very much greyer than the hair on his head, and he might need a shave soon. It had been some time since she'd helped a man shave. He was propped on his side, and pillows and blankets had been pushed around him to keep him off his wound. It looked as if Ezekiel had done a reasonable job of the bandage, and she found herself trying not to look at where it was almost covered by the bed linens. He was lean, this Mr. Jones, but not thin, like Stan had been. This was a muscled man, well used to manual labour. Remembering the reason for being in his room, she said, I came to see if you needed anything. Your shirt washed, or—"
"No,"
he said sharply, then added,
"Thank you."
"Perhaps you'd like some tea," she said, hopeful.
"Seek raw tea,"
he answered and nodded towards the pannikin on the bedside table. "Bread and jam? Or eggs, perhaps?" she asked, and at his hesitation, at last felt she had made a breakthrough. Food. Time to take charge, Lily Hartman. I'll bring breakfast.
"No."
He set his mouth.
"No need to wait on me."
All right, no breakfast. Mr. Jones, I'm sure your brother would have told you of another visitor in the night. She went on, another invalid, as it turns out. Would you know how to make a pair of crutches, perhaps to instruct young Gifford? She asked firmly, her hands now quite still as they laced in front of her. He cleared his throat and glanced again.
"I would."
"Right, I shall send him in." She swept to the chair beside his bed, stepping over a swag on the floor. She retrieved his discarded torn shirt, caked with blood. "Ezekiel and I are going to my home now so that I might change out of these clothes," she said, and gestured at her own blood-stained apparel. His blood, she was reminding him. Judah moved a little uncomfortably under her stare.
"Aye, very good."
"Aye, very good. He can be uneasy all he likes." "I presume one of your brother's shirts would fit you," she went on, "as I don't believe we will be visiting your house on this particular trip to bring anything of your own." It seemed he had nothing to say to that. He nodded, at least this time, his gaze, moody and dark, connected with hers for a few moments before he looked away again. "Good day, Mr. Jones." She headed for the door.
"Mrs. Hartman."
Lily stopped. His voice was hoarse, but his tone was firm. She feared her dreams of getting to know Mr. Judah Jones were about to be dashed. All the same, she tried not to allow any such feeling to show as she turned to face him. This is the end of CD 6. The book continues on CD 7.